After discovering their single petrification device holds the key to reaching the moon, Senku and the Kingdom of Science embark on their most ambitious mission yet.
Someday I'm going to go to the moon.
Building a rocket to confront Y-Man and uncover the truth behind humanity's petrification. With their full team finally revived, the race to space begins. In this epic finale, can they solve the greatest mystery of all time and save humanity from the stone world? Let's find out. The water flow from the dam was incredible. Ukyo couldn't believe they had such a thing, including a hydroelectric power plant. Chrome was impressed by the scale of it all. According to Senku, this was all thanks to Ruri and the villagers. He explained that they were the ones who diligently worked to build it while they were away. For such a large-scale mission, he said they needed many able workers. That's why they continued reviving more people there, while Francois served them delicious food. Gin also greeted them and asked if they had seen him on TV. He had the newly revived people sit down to give them an overview of the post-petrification world. Using what appeared to be an illustrated storybook, he explained that they had obtained one of the mystery devices responsible for turning them to stone, but the big bad villain, Y-Man, was on the moon. Therefore, before he could target them again, they were building a rocket to fly there and deal with him. That was the gist of the story. The listeners were thoroughly impressed by him. Chelsea commented that, as expected, he gave a jaw-dropping performance. According to Ryu Sui, their significantly increasing population needed a way to be won over. That's why he wanted entertainment media. Sai understood this sentiment. He recalled that when he was drowning in math before, video games helped him persevere. Ryu Sui laughed at what he said, noting that was one angle. But he added that whoever effectively controls the media owns the world. According to him, the old world had broadcast TV, Google, and Netflix. And now, their new world had once again reached that stage. Because of this, they wondered if the two were really siblings since they were completely different from each other. Meanwhile, that night, Kaseki was still busy working with Senku on a project. They finished it quickly, and it turned out to be a television. Senku explained that they already had bronze tubes when they made the radar. By giving scan lines vertical motion too, afterimages could create pictures. He mentioned that coincidentally, the very first television system was made in Japan. Ryusui was impressed because they were repeating history now. Yo got excited and asked how many channels the TV had. Everyone was shocked by his question and fell silent. Senko had forgotten that they didn't have broadcasters in this world. But Ukyo said it was obvious that he knew that while they were making it. Senku just smiled and said he's right, because they weren't going to watch TV shows on it. They wondered what would be shown there if not TV shows. Meanwhile, Ryu Sui mentioned that a boat was scheduled to arrive today from North America to Japan. And that was the delivery Sai had been waiting for. He was extremely surprised when he heard that. Finally, what he had been expecting arrived, and Taiju was the one who transported it. He proudly said they had made something awesome. The friends fist bumped because of that. Chrome was impressed and asked how much wiring was there. He replied that there were about 10,000 donuts and a few 100,000 magnets. Gin was curious about what that thing was. Senku answered that it had a 16-bit, 60 kHz CPU as its brain. For memory, they had 129 core units with 512K ROM and 16K SRAM. Gin commented that the exact specifications were even more cryptic. So Sai explained that in terms of computing power, it was on par with the NES. Because of that delivery, the computer that Sai had been yearning for was finally complete. Running programs on it was a bit tricky, Senku said. They needed to feed punch cards for the computer to read the patterns of holes. They wondered if those were the game programs. Yo was curious about how they would play using those. Sai immediately started working on his computer, and he quickly finished what was needed. They waited briefly as the punch cards were fed, and as a result, they had a game. Everyone couldn't believe that even in this world, they now had video games. According to Sai, a drop puzzle game like that was just a simple program. He said he could make many more in short order. His brother Ryusui was proud of him. It was truly impressive because in a short time, he created various games that everyone thoroughly enjoyed. Even the spectators had fun watching. That evening, Sai and Ryusui played chess, but Ryusui lost. He accepted his defeat, acknowledging that the chess AI Sai used was beyond human intellect. Sai recounted that a long time ago, the first human versus computer chess matches took place. The world champion Kasparov faced an AI called Deep Blue. During the infamous 36th move, everyone expected the AI to attack with its queen. That was part of the trap set by Kasparov, humanity's mightiest contender. However, Deep Blue thought for a long time and took its time. In the end, it moved its pawn. While the move seemed foolish at first, it was because no person, not even Kasparov, had conceived that this brilliant move would lead to its victory. It transcended the human mind. And at that moment, science gave rise to an unknown. According to Ryu Sui, the unknowable entity that defeated humanity wanted to know everything and desired everything. In a way, he said that science was the greediest thing that existed or would ever exist. He suggested they should also think about what Y-Man did, the petrification devices that were a forbidden power. Meanwhile, Kaseki was busy inside. When Gin asked what it was, Chelsea thought it was a vacuum tube for the Medusa. According to Senku, they knew it would stop working when it deteriorated too much. Therefore, that thing would slow down its gradual decay process. They placed the Medusa in a glass dome and stored it securely. Ukyo locked it inside. Outside, Yo was curious about how far they needed to be before they could activate it by shouting. Gin answered that it was impossible even at that distance. When they went out, there was a sound coming from where they had placed the Medusa. The two became curious about what was happening, so they asked each other if they had heard a sound. Yo suggested they should check it first. However, it was locked. The device clicked, and Gin was familiar with that sound. They were bewildered about how it happened since no one had said anything. They tried to run to escape, but even though it was locked, the petrification device activated. The Petri beam itself moved on its own. As a result, both Gin and Yo turned to stone. Those outside became worried when they noticed it. Yo's statue even shattered, which shocked them. Because of this, Ryu Sui and the others quickly ran away. From a distance, Chrome and Kahaku noticed that light. Everyone was familiar with it, so they were nervous. Suika was curious about how it happened, and Kahaku wondered if this was Y-Man's big attack. Chrome was sweating nervously, saying they were done for. They wondered if this was the big one meant to end everything. Both Senku and Ryu Sui stopped while looking at the light. The two seemed to have a plan, discussing if their location was sufficient. Senku suggested they should step back 2 more meters. They just faced the Petri beam, with Senku even smiling, which shocked everyone. According to Senku, its speed was proportional to its range. Because of that, they had many opportunities to observe it. The speed indicated a radius of 20 meters. After that, in the evening, they attached the 2 statues together and poured revival fluid. Gin and Yo returned to normal, though Yo was missing some hair. Ukyo checked the Medusa's container and examined the device. Senko held it and said they should question the 2 witnesses from the scene of the crime. The ship captain questioned Gin and Yo about this, but Yo completely denied it. Though they were the last ones there, and he might have thought about what would happen if they shouted outside the case, he said it was just a joke. Gin calmed him down, saying he was blameless. Before they went into reasoning or deduction, Gin said he would tell the exact sequence of events. First, there was a clamor inside the safe. Second, there was the sound of glass cracking. Third, it clicked. Then finally, the flash came out. When Senku observed inside, he contemplated the clamor Gin mentioned inside the safe. He said the vacuum tube might have just cracked, but they couldn't be sure about that. Gin added that no one had touched or spoken to the safe or the device. Everyone was deep in thought about what happened. Kaseki asked if the light came out by itself, and Chrome was curious if it was possible to activate it remotely and how. Kahaku thought Y-Man had started attacking humanity from the moon again. Sai considered if it was possible through radio waves. But according to his brother, if he could do that, why didn't he do it from the beginning? Meanwhile, Chelsea commented how sweet it was that he hadn't zapped the whole world. Suika added that there were so many mysteries behind it. Because of what happened, Kahaku wondered what would hit them next. Therefore, they needed to hurry and fight Y-Man. Gin commented that this was expected of her. In Chrome's mind, if they took the suggested hard and fast route, that meant a one-way rocket. He asked how they would know where on the moon they would land. He thought the exact location was a key detail. Ryusui answered that that was precisely their starting point. They needed to nail down his exact location. It was on the moon, indeed, but where on that vast surface? Kaseki thought they couldn't just pick a spot and search from there. Senku answered that would be a hopeless task. The moon's diameter was over a quarter of Earth's. Suika couldn't believe it was that big. Kahaku said that because it looked small in the sky, the Ishigami villagers thought it was just like a floating lake. In any case, their situation had changed now. However, they still lacked data. Senku wanted to start experimenting with the Medusa to reproduce that result, but at the same time, Ukio knew this was too risky. He said they should remove its battery for now, just to be sure. So, he and Kaseki did just that. Meanwhile, while heading out, Gin called Yo. He asked if he had done anything to the Medusa when they brought it from the US. But as he said before, he hadn't done anything at all. Besides, Ukio had been carrying it the whole time. Senku seemed to know what he was thinking. There was a chance someone had scheduled that attack. Senku agreed with that. Chelsea was curious about how that would happen. She thought someone with a Medusa might have said 3 months, 3 meters, or whatever. That was the perfect crime, and Gin was truly a detective. He quieted her down. Senku wondered who would do that and what they would gain from it. Besides, Chelsea said they were all besties now. According to Gin, it was physically possible, and as long as they couldn't study what really happened, they needed to consider all possibilities. For now, they would monitor the Medusa at all times under total lockdown, where no one could access it. But they asked how they would do that. The Perseus sailed again the next day with a targeted destination. Kahaku dug in the mines of Kagoshima because it was full of selenium-bearing silver ore. Senku was pleased they got selenium from there. Gin asked what that was, since he hadn't heard about it before. Senku prepared several more elements from their natural treasure chest: skarn, arsenic, and tellurium. Gin added that he wasn't familiar with those either. He wondered if arsenic wasn't poison. Senku answered with a smile that they were all poison. They couldn't believe they would be using deadly forces. Chrome observed while he worked. Next, Senku coated it with a photoelectric surface using those poisons so that light, meaning what the lens sees, would be converted into electrical signals. When those signals are beamed to the TV screen they made, Senku explained, they would have a TV camera. Senku posed for this. They placed the TV camera inside the container where the Medusa was stored. Meanwhile, Yo kept watch over it. Gin was pleased when he noticed it was a security camera. Although they couldn't record, Senku said it was good enough to monitor the Medusa. Ryusui was happy because they had reinvented live broadcast. He repeated that whoever controlled the media in this new world basically owned it. They sent that camera to America, where they could watch baseball games happening outside. The people there were overjoyed. Because of this, Ryusui established Studio Dragon TV there. However, according to Senku, they didn't make the TV camera for his amusement. Gin added that it was to monitor the Medusa, but Senku denied this. He said the real task was 10 billion times more important. It would tell them Y-Man's location on the moon. Even their best telescope couldn't show enough from Earth. But they should think about it, he said. An eye in space beaming a live feed down to them to scan the moon's surface. They were shocked that this was his plan. Senku revealed that the true purpose was to reveal the location of Y-Man whom they were searching for. Therefore, they would launch a satellite from their stony new world. So, they should all get excited about that. While stargazing through a telescope, the things that commonly obstruct the view are Earth's atmosphere and bad weather. Ryusui realized that this was the reason why they would launch a telescope directly into space, to spot where Y-Man was located. Senku confirmed this was correct. He explained that a man-made satellite would help them peek at the moon firsthand. The villagers became curious when they heard about this. Kaseki asked if it was like their airplane. Chrome couldn't fully comprehend how it would continue flying until they found Y-Man. He asked if it wouldn't run out of fuel. Senku replied that the satellite doesn't actually fly. Instead, it continuously falls toward Earth. He demonstrated how this happens and how it orbits in space. Suika and others couldn't fully understand this concept. But because of this, they thought that the satellite wouldn't need fuel. More or less, said Senku. Although, he explained it still needs an energy source. Ukyo added that electricity is needed for beaming photos back to Earth and calculating and adjusting its position. Suika then asked why they couldn't just use batteries. According to Chrome, those would run out quickly. That's why Senku said they would use an energy source in space that doesn't run out. They were lucky that the sun was already there, emitting an infinite amount of energy. While Kahaku and Suika didn't know how to get energy from the sun, Gin realized they were referring to solar cells. Inside the lab, Senku showed the sweet ingredient from Kagoshima that Kahaku had excavated. Once again, he explained that selenium would be handy. He said they would just need to combine thin sheets of it, and it can convert light into electricity. Although it would be a super primitive type with crap efficiency, he explained that if they made it big enough, it would do the job. They would combine sulfurina, fluorite, seawater, and magnesium to create magnesium fluoride. Then they would layer glass, gold, selenium, and copper. As a result, they successfully created and operated a solar panel. Chrome was amazed that they could have energy just from the sun. However, he became concerned when he realized what would happen when it rains. Senku responded that there's no nasty weather up there. And according to Ukyo, the satellite would be far above the clouds. Suika couldn't believe that those big panels would just float high up in the sky where the sun is. Chrome was overjoyed because they would have a battery that never dies. After that, they accomplished many things in succession. When the launch site at Treasure Island was ready, Senku and his group delivered their unmanned rocket there. Soon after, Senku was surprised because Zeno and his team had also finished their project. They had finally acquired the Level 99 rocket engine. They were delighted to see each other's final products. Zeno admitted that Senku's craft was elegant. Senku returned the compliment to Zeno. They had managed to complete the engine in just 3 years. He remarked that Zeno's skills were still sharp even after sleeping for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Minami announced from Treasure Island that moments from now, the new world's first ever rocket would launch a satellite into space. Gin asked if she understood that her broadcast wouldn't reach beyond mainland Japan. Minami asked him to let her have this moment since it was her dream. According to Ryu Sui, they were thankful to Dr. Zeno, the world's preeminent rocket scientist, and to Senku, the only high schooler who had launched a homemade rocket into space. Everyone celebrated because for the world's ultimate master pupil dream team, sending an unmanned rocket into space would be just a walk in the park. The rocket took off, but the result was contrary to their expectations. It crashed into the water. Because of this, they retrieved the rocket underwater. Zeno and Senku studied it carefully. Zeno noticed that the thermal insulation was corroded by gas, which caused a hole in its nozzle. Senku remarked that it looked solid on paper. However, he thought their stone world creations would surely be shoddy. Days passed, and they didn't stop making new rockets. When they launched again, the rocket exploded this time, which shocked everyone. Senku said it was just faulty wiring, but Gin couldn't believe that. Zeno added that it was just exceedingly complex. Even rocket R&D in the 21st century encountered such incidents. Sai compared it to coding. If they forgot even just one hyphen in a line, it could cause failure in the entire program. Senku and Zeno didn't stop improving it. They launched a third rocket, but it encountered problems again. When they studied what happened, Zeno explained that an air bubble in the vaporized fuel caused it. Because of this, its inner wings were destroyed. They made a fourth version, but it just spun around before crashing again. Nevertheless, the mentor-student team didn't give up on fixing it. They launched again, but it still exploded. After several tries, when it finally took off, a moment that the spectators celebrated, it didn't even make it past the clouds before exploding again. Yo was amazed that the spirit of the two hadn't wavered. Several years had passed, and they kept returning to square one. While watching from outside the lab, he couldn't believe these two and wondered how they could do it. Instead of becoming discouraged and giving up, Senku and Zeno continued working on the rocket, even though it repeatedly failed. Meanwhile, Suika and Chrome watched them while drawing their own plans on the roof. In their next test launch, the rocket exploded again, but Senku and Zeno persisted. Meanwhile, Sai was busy programming on the computer. Chrome commented on how amazing the rocket math was. As he stared at the moon, he realized that going to space wasn't easy, because even for the world's top 2 rocket scientists, Senku and Zeno, it was tricky. They had done countless trial and error, with as many failures as tests, over several years. Therefore, he and Suika's job was to observe and study everything they could learn along the way. Suika patiently studied the reasons for their failures and the possible solutions for them. While on the roof holding their flag, Chrome said that this had been the path of a science user ever since they met Senku. The more they learned, the more they realized how little they knew. Chrome placed the flag up there. Meanwhile, Senku and Zeno launched another rocket, worry visible on their faces. But when it took off successfully, everyone couldn't hold back their tears. Finally, they were successful as the rocket emerged from the clouds and reached space. Kahaku and others were delighted because it was their first successful launch. Now, they could search for Y-Man on the moon. However, according to Senku, not quite. Zeno commented that this first one was a simple yet elegant recon satellite. Finally, they had acquired a satellite. According to Senku, even space required a patient and step-by-step approach, starting with rockets, then satellites, then space telescopes, until they achieved their goal of a one-way manned spacecraft. Gin couldn't fully comprehend the horror if they had started immediately with manned crafts. The numerous failures that occurred could have caused many deaths. Because of this, Chrome realized something. In the stone world, the countless test launches used only smaller-scale rockets. He couldn't fully imagine what it would be like if they made something even bigger. Suika said that the two-way moon rocket they wanted to make would be possibly 5 times bigger than the others, at least according to size calculations. This made Chrome think deeply. Meanwhile, Senku was surprised when he noticed something on their satellite. Now that it was in space, they obtained images from it. Kahaku couldn't believe that was how their world looked from above. Ryusui mentioned that they already knew from their worldwide voyages that the geography had shifted over 3,700 years. Senku asked if they could get anything from that image, but Chelsea was very excited. Ryusui added that they would need a massive labor force for their space-related efforts. Senku agreed with this. Making an accurate revised globe was the next step in their big plan to revive 7 billion people. When combining Ryusui's leadership skills and Chelsea's expertise as a master geographer, they would be the ultimate tag team. With the help of that satellite, they showed the 58th century new and revised globe. Gin was shocked when he realized this wasn't the 21st century anymore. He knew that, but it was still wild to him. Anyway, among the things Chelsea noticed was that Yellowstone wouldn't be the same as before. The Gallatin Mountains had transformed into a lake due to the Yellowstone volcano's eruption. Meanwhile, Yo didn't care about this since he never knew about that place anyway. Besides that, they also learned that the Panama Canal had become marsh and grassland. The desert had spread to the north. Ukyo said it was good they didn't need to pass through there anymore. Moving to China, the plains had become wetlands with large rivers. These changes were the result of nuclear power plants after the petrification. But the radiation had become harmless after 10 to 100 years of extensive dilution. Because of this, the majority of Africa's deserts were now savannas and forests. Taiju thought this was a good change. Not all changes were bad, he said. Soon enough, they had various boats that they still named Perseus. Their exploration towards the goal of reaching the moon continued, so they kept improving until they succeeded again. As a result, they finally created a space telescope. Kahaku became excited because now, she said they could clearly see the moon's surface. She claimed she could use her powerful vision to find Y-Man. Zeno sadly stated that those images were raw data. Her good vision wouldn't help them with this. On the side, Senku said they shouldn't be so sure about that. Previously, Kahaku had discovered an oil field when she spotted a black blotch in an aerial photo. He added that her stellar vision was a product of her focus and attention to detail. Zeno couldn't believe this. However, he wasn't surprised that Byakuya and the other astronauts could produce such exemplary descendants. This would likely become an asset in space. Meanwhile, Chrome and Suika were talking. Suika was happy that they could finally start searching for Y-Man. However, she said that once Kahaku finds it, they would want to launch the one-way rocket. Chrome agreed with this, which is why they had a deadline. They needed to complete their own mission first, then build a round-trip rocket. In his mind, he thought it was easy to think about but difficult to do. That round-trip rocket would be 5 times bigger. Moreover, he didn't know how many times they would need to test it. It would surely take decades. So he wondered how they would pull that off. Going back to Kahaku, she kept watch over the satellite images they were receiving from the moon, while others were busy with their own tasks. She was even eating in front of the TV to find Y-Man, and when she noticed something, she called Senku and Zeno to show it to them. She quickly pointed out the satellite image to them and said there was a spot that was changing little by little over time. Although he couldn't identify that anomaly, as a NASA scientist, Zeno could confirm that it was indeed unnatural for the moon's surface. He commented that it was something truly elegant. At last, they had found it. Senka smiled and said hello to Y-Man. Finally, they claimed to have found him on the far surface of the moon, the sole keeper of secrets about mass petrification, the mysterious mastermind known as Y-Man. They celebrated this discovery. According to Taiju, they would go after him. This time, Kahaku said they could bring the fight to him before he could make the first move. She declared they would attack him hard and fast. Senku, while smiling, said they would use their one-way rocket, which would end with some of them being petrified. Watching from a distance, Suika remarked that it was good they had found Y-Man. However, she shed tears upon seeing how eager they were to launch the one-way rocket. They hadn't met the deadline to complete the round-trip rocket in time. Meanwhile, Chrome still hadn't given up on that project. On the other hand, Kaseki announced it was time to build a rocket they would ride. Using their revised world map, Francois suggested they should form a coalition on a global scale. Ryusui remarked that it wasn't just global, but rather on a galactic scale. He said they would unite as one since combining everyone's efforts was a tried and true strategy of the Kingdom of Science. While Chrome remained busy, he questioned what he heard about the galactic scale and coming together as one. He stayed laser-focused on his goal and thought carefully. The next day, he was overjoyed as he had received a flash of inspiration. He claimed to have found a way for everyone to survive and return home using a two-way rocket made by science. He brought his proposal to Sai, who studied it. Senku and the others were surprised when Chrome prepared a mega science conference. He called everyone's attention to speak. It was a battle between rookie scientists and super scientists. Chrome declared they wouldn't accept the crazy suicide mission of the one-way rocket. Furthermore, he stated they would achieve a happy ending using the two-way rocket instead. And they were shocked to hear this. However, Gin said that naturally, they all wished such a thing was possible. But according to Senku, they probably already knew the problem. He explained that a two-way rocket needed to be gigantic, and they would have to start test launches from scratch if that were the case. Zeno added that this would involve 5 times the risk and time commitment. He foresaw that the work would take decades. Suika argued that that was the reason Chrome had been racking his brain this whole time. He was searching for a way for their little rocket to somehow go to and return from the moon. Because of this, Chrome revealed something to them. He said it was the never-before-done scheme of the rookie science team. He slowly raised the barrier and announced they would take a gigantic spaceship capable of returning from the moon. They would launch it in 5 pieces. And then, in space, they would combine these pieces into one megaship. Finally, his proposal was revealed, which shocked everyone. Gin was speechless, while Kahaku admitted she had no clue about that space stuff. But she said that even she could recognize Chrome's nutty schemes when she saw them. Meanwhile, Senku and Zeno remained quiet upon seeing this. But according to Senku, the space station where his father and others lived was also launched in pieces and assembled in space. Chrome fell to the ground when he realized Senku already knew about this. Suika was in tears because what they thought was a never-before-done plan had already been discovered. Senka smiled and said, "Wait, who cares if this isn't a new idea?" He called it a wild, out-of-this-world plan that was 10 billion% outside his and Zeno's thinking. And back then, even NASA had theorized about launching a piecemeal spaceship, according to Zeno. However, the stumbling block was the design. The complex design needed for a two-way spaceship required interlocking joinable sections, which would involve several million individual components. Ryusui asked if this meant they had a chance to build the multi-part ship if they put the people of the New World to work making those millions of components. Chrome smiled upon hearing this while everyone's jaws dropped. Sai added that he had already done the math for those launches. However, Senku pointed out that everything works on paper. Zeno said it was truly an elegant notion, but it couldn't be called realistic. Suika asked what if they all worked hard for it. Chelsea agreed since that's what besties do. Therefore, Chrome suggested asking everyone which plan they preferred. But Gin objected, saying they would need to reveal the secret of the petrification device in that case. Chrome then asked what if they only asked those who were present. He admitted they were the rookie science team, and the super technical details were lost on them. So, if they said it was 10 billion% impossible, and the only option was the one-way trip, then he would back down. However, if there was the slimmest shot of making it work, then both sides should duke it out. They asked, one-way or two-way. Everyone needed to decide because that's how the kingdom of science worked. They combined their strengths to build and create. The super scientist duo smiled, and Zeno whispered something to Senku. Ryusui got excited because this would be the first democratic vote in the stone world. Fortunately, Sai had coded a voting program which made Gin impressed by his speed. One by one, those present approached to vote in a Squid Game-like manner. They would press a button for either one-way or two-way trip to record it secretly. Senku joked that there should be no voting fraud. Ryusui remarked that it was pointless to worry about that. Just as Senku never lied when it came to science, his brother Sai would never taint the coding with deceit. After a while, the voting results arrived. Everyone watched the monitor to see if their spaceship would be for a one-way journey or round trip. The two-way option won. Kahaku and Chrome were overjoyed because of this. The final tally showed that the round trip had won. According to Chrome, they won fair and square, so there was no turning back. Senku agreed with this. Upon leaving, Senku said the path ahead would be somewhat brutal, but Suika assured him that they were there and willing to help. Inside, Sai mentioned that while the votes were anonymous, there was no harm in showing the tally. He looked at each vote and was shocked to discover that 10 people voted for the two-way option, and not a single person chose the one-way option. So that means that even Senku and Zeno supported Chrome and Suika's idea. Outside, Chrome couldn't contain his celebration because he and Suika, who was also in tears, had succeeded. Ukyo approached Senku and said he had heard their whispers earlier. Senku just laughed and said nothing could escape his godlike ears. According to Senku, the whole world would work on that transforming rocket. Therefore, the only way to accomplish this would be to hook up the stone world to the internet. Excitement was evident on his face, while Gin could barely wait for it. They went straight to work since the spaceship for their moon mission would require a few million components. Therefore, they would use the internet to assemble these parts with the help of engineers worldwide. Taiju was overjoyed because the internet was what he used on his smartphone. Finally, they had returned to that point. Yep, Senku answered. Regarding the major groundwork for their trip to the moon, this would be their biggest crafting project and their very last. According to Gin, Twitter and the rest of social media used the internet. However, because it was constantly used, it was taken for granted. Nevertheless, he had just one basic question. How would they actually create the internet? Senku answered that they would use Tochu tea. They knew it because of its health properties. They pondered this, and Taiju thought it meant they would drink tasty tea and power up to create the internet. However, according to Senku, that was wrong. The scene moved to Hiroshima Prefecture's Inoshima, where Taiju and Kahaku could be seen busy gathering leaves for tea. Francois brewed it for everyone to enjoy. Chelsea explained that Yukamiya was the source of Tochu tea. It was a freakishly hardy tree that even pesky bugs couldn't harm. She added that it had survived since the time of dinosaurs. Chrome was curious if what he was holding was the fruit of that tree. He opened it and split it in half. He was curious about its sticky, stretchy stuff that looked like spider webs. According to Senku, that's why they were there. The tea was just a bonus. It was called Yukamiya elastomer, a polymer cousin of rubber, extra hard and extremely sturdy. And because it could stand up to water and electricity, it was used to make things like golf balls and 3D printer filaments. Taiju asked if they weren't supposed to be making the internet. Gin was also curious about how exactly those powerful sticky webs became the World Wide Web. When Chrome observed it closely, he thought about its ability to stand up to water and electricity. He then realized something and thought they would drop cords under the ocean to link the whole world. Senku smiled at this. For that project, they would use steel, Yukamiya elastomer, nickel, and copper wire. Before long, they had acquired undersea cables. According to Ryu Sui, connecting Japan to the US all at once wasn't an option. Therefore, their relay point would be the island of eternal summer, which was Hawaii. They traveled there, where they gathered and picked coffee cherries. As a result, they also got to enjoy coffee in Hawaii. They suspected Ryu Sui had another motive for this pit stop in Hawaii. They connected various Perseus ships from America to Indonesia and throughout the world. When the cables were positioned, Senku prepared to plug in the final cable. Everyone waited from different locations to see what the result would be. When the internet cable was connected, everyone was amazed to see people from different places on the screen. Finally, they had acquired internet access. Gin was delighted to see their online meeting, while Taiju was in tears. Everyone celebrated as they saw their companions on the monitors surrounding them. From the other side, Yuzuriha was impressed that even though they were far apart, they could come together like this to talk. Ginro cried intensely because it meant saying goodbye to the irritating Morse code. But his brother couldn't believe that was the reason he was getting emotional. According to Kahaku, now that they were connected, science users worldwide could work as one. So, Dr. Zeno, the former NASA rocket scientist, faced the camera and introduced himself, while Senku wanted to skip that introduction and go straight to the topic. Because of this, Gin commented that Senku really lacked emotion and gravitas, preferring to get straight to business. According to Zeno, the spaceship they planned to build required millions of components, and it would be designed by engineers worldwide. Kaseki asked how this would be done. Would they draw blueprints on paper or make multiple copies? If so, they would need to send papers around the world before they could discuss. But Senku said that wasn't the case. He asked them what they thought was the purpose of the cables they installed and creating the internet. According to him, the design work would be done online. Everyone was shocked to hear this. Sai said it didn't seem possible to do that, not with a primitive computer. But according to Senku, they would use e-paper. Or to be more precise, the distant ancestor of e-paper. He asked if they knew about the electron beams that powered their TVs. Now there are going to be two, a strong one and a weak one. He demonstrated that light appeared where the E-pin would hit. Because of this, they could write on the screen itself. Gin was impressed by this. When adding a metallic plate capable of reading visual data, they could send drawings to other people on the network. It was like the earliest CAD system sold to the public. Those on the other line got excited when they heard the plan. Meanwhile, Kahaku and Gin couldn't understand it. Only the engineers on the call seemed excited about it. Zeno added that this method would give them a way to share their drawn designs with other fellow engineers worldwide in real time. This was the return of live screen sharing. After that, they discussed what the astronauts would sit on during their trip to the moon. It was already completed, and Gin was impressed by their speed. Mobilizing the world was worth it. Chrome tested sitting in it. However, he didn't seem pleased with it. When Kaseki asked if it was nice and comfy, Chrome answered it was more like bad and cramped. They would need to get used to it. Kahaku thought they could now reach the moon in the sky. But Chrome clarified that it would be a round trip, and everyone would return alive. Senku was pleased because at long last, this would be the final boss battle against Y-Man. Therefore, they needed to choose their team of astronauts and begin training for outer space travel. Ryu Sui had already reserved one of those seats. Their rocket could carry 3 people. They were about to announce who would travel to the moon. Taiju was excited because finally, they would face Y-Man while Suika was curious about who would go. Yo mentioned that if they forced him, he would consider heeding this call of duty. However, Kahaku responded that no one was asking him. As for Chelsea, she thought that Zeno, being the space expert, should choose who would go there. Thus, he discussed that in the Stone World, space missions were entirely different beasts compared to their previous missions. First, for the majority of their flight, including takeoff, their astronauts would be petrified. Gin mentioned that they only needed to be revived for the critical parts of the mission. Senku added that designing their life support system would be easier because of that assumption. Ukyo said this was a distinct advantage in their new world. However, the unprecedented difficulty would come from not knowing exactly what the nature of that mission would be. Zeno questioned who Y-Man really was and if their science could defeat him. The only thing they could rely on was their experience in dealing with Y-Man's Petri beam. and that key factor might decide humanity's fate. Because of this, they wouldn't seek out astronauts from the 21st century. Instead, they would choose and train 3 astronauts from among themselves. They fell silent upon hearing this, and they grew curious. Zeno said they would need a pilot, a scientist, and a warrior. Ryusui suddenly interjected, saying he already had 1 slot there. In the background, Chrome agreed since he was a pilot and wouldn't object to that. Zeno then stated that selecting the scientist was a bigger issue. This was because Zeno needed to stay on ground at mission control, since no one else could fulfill that role. Chrome looked at Senku and said wasn't it obvious who the scientist should be? Suika agreed and asked why they even needed to debate about it. Therefore, Zeno explained that although their chosen ones might be petrified during the flight, their astronauts still needed to undergo stamina training. Senku's expression changed upon hearing this, and both Gin and Kahaku became nervous for him. In the next scene, Senku was indeed training in the water. He appeared to be struggling while swimming underwater. While watching him, Nikki remarked that even a flea could outlast him. She commented on how pathetic it was that he was already surrendering just during the clothed swimming test. She questioned how he would manage to take even a single step in a heavy spacesuit. From not too far away, Suika noticed Nikki and the others there. This prompted Taiju to ask when they had returned to Japan. Gin thought they hadn't noticed their return because they saw them every day in video calls. On the other hand, Ryusui mentioned that now that their internet was back, they no longer needed to station key people around the world. This was because everyone was online and sharing science tips there. Thus, they had reached the phase where people in each region were building back civilization on their own. Finally, Yuzuriha and the others had returned, which greatly delighted Taiju. Even Ginro had rejoined them, but when he tried to hug the siblings, Kahaku jabbed him until he fell to the ground. Gin asked Zeno about the reason for bringing the troops back. Zeno praised his perceptiveness. But now, he said, they needed to choose a warrior for their mission. The newcomers went straight to jumping into the water, which surprised Senku. Tsukasa and Yoga also swam. While watching from the boat, Chrome commented on how good the Ishigami village people were in water. After all, they were indeed a water tribe. Wearing clothes while swimming wasn't a big deal to them, as they were naturally strong swimmers. Upon noticing them, Senku paused and remembered his father, who also had problems in clothed swimming. He reminisced these memorable moments with a smile. Suddenly, his swimming improved and became faster. Chrome was pleased when he noticed this, and Suika remarked that he was giving it his all. After the swimming test, they moved on to the concentration trial. While watching, Ukio mentioned that he had heard about these tests. Examinees were given white jigsaw puzzles to solve, or other tasks demanding patience and diligence. Kahaku was shocked by the paper given to her. She got a nosebleed from the complicated maze she had to solve. Although she struggled, Senku seemed to have no problems with it. Gin became curious about who created those wild mazes. It turned out to be Sai using a maze-making program. Next came the equilibrium trial where Nikki spun the participants while seated. Ginro threw up, while Magma and Kinro couldn't stand straight because of that trial. Meanwhile, others were impressed when they saw Tsukasa jump. Yoga wasn't surprised because Tsukasa was really good in that arena. Magma was irritated because Tsukasa had been the strongest since day one. Ryusui asked if it was settled that Tsukasa would be the warrior they would send to space. But Zeno replied that it wasn't necessarily so. All candidates had proven to be elegant physical specimens. Senko said they wouldn't just compare raw stats and records of participants, because the battle against Y-Man would require more than that. Zeno responded that they were hardly experts when it came to combat. Tsukasa was surprised when Kahaku suddenly jumped from below without any difficulty. He remembered what Kahaku did during their journey, which impressed him. That evening, Tsukasa and Kahaku faced each other at the cliff. When Kahaku asked why he called her there, he suddenly gave her a stern look, then drew his sword to fight. Alert, Kahaku quickly blocked his weapon. After backing away, she asked if he had gone mad. She demanded an explanation from Tsukasa. Now that they have reached this point, she refused to believe that he would backstab them now. Tsukasa suddenly smiled and apologized. He asked forgiveness for gauging her skills. He remembered their first meeting, where they had also crossed blades. He added that after countless life and death battles, He could say she was now a capable warrior like Yoga and himself. Kahaku returned her weapon and told him not to flatter her. Besides, when it came to martial arts, she said she couldn't match him. Tsukasa replied that the gap between them was no longer the yawning chasm she had imagined, especially since they now had weapons provided by the Kingdom of Science. He said that science was the great equalizer. Therefore, in his opinion, an agile warrior would be best for moon combat. Additionally, it would reduce the rocket's total weight by dozens of kilograms. Zeno thought carefully and soon decided on their choices for the moon mission. He would now announce the three who would face Y-Man. The chosen ones were Ryusui as their pilot, Senku as the scientist, and Kahaku as the warrior. Joy was evident on Ryusui's face as he showed the model of Senku 11. They commented that upon learning he would go to space, he's been over the moon. Francois wasn't surprised since Ryusui always desired everything. Chelsea was impressed by his work, saying the scale model was extremely accurate. And Senku was pleased because it would help them better understand what they would be working on. Kaseki then remembered how they built the Perseus with Ryusui's model's help. Ryusui proudly showed off his spaceship in a bottle, minus the bottle. While busy typing, Sai recounted that since they were children, Ryusui had always been making model ships. He always included Sai to run the numbers. This was shown in the next scene when they were children. Ryusui said his model ships wouldn't be content remaining as just models. He manifested that someday he would set sail with his own ship. He approached his sibling to program a sailing simulator for his ship. Back in the present, they could see the flight simulator for their spaceship that Sai had made. Everyone was delighted and played it. Taiju couldn't believe that Ryusui had broken the record again. According to Yuzuriha, that was because it was his true calling. Ryusui boasted that of course he was the champion at that dinky sim game. However, their special space flight powered by New World Science would be a trip into uncharted waters. The deciding factors would be the experience and intuition forged in the stone world. Ukyo mentioned that he was extremely experienced in that sense. Nikki added that no one else could dream of being a better pilot than Ryusui. Everyone cheered for him as he reflected on the stone world, experience, and piloting. He flashed back to when they saw the enemy's plane flying low. They thought then that its intention was to attack. He also remembered when it faced the sun. He continued using the flight simulator, intensely engaged in it. Suddenly, enemies appeared, which puzzled Kahaku. She asked if there would be firefights in space, but Sai called it a bonus round. On the side, Senku mentioned they might engage in firefights in space. Moving to the lab, Kaseki was busy working with Zeno and Senku. Zeno said moon combat was an unknown factor to them. Senku said they should think about Y-Man's ultimate weapon that they would never be prepared to counter. Chrome was curious about this and answered that it was the Medusa. Senku gave him 10 billion points for that. He added that they weren't the sort of dummies who would rush to their death. Therefore, they would face the Medusa using 2 special science items of their own. Joel showed one of these items. He said it was the masterwork of his watchmaking career. He called it the Resurrection Watch. This exquisite piece contained a single dose of revival fluid. Chrome wore it for testing. When a Petri beam strike was approaching, the user could set the timer for the next 3 seconds or later. Chrome tried it, and it worked. It released revival fluid onto his hand. Everyone was impressed. Chrome suggested everyone on Earth should wear one. If so, petrification would no longer be a threat to them. Zeno asked if their eyes couldn't see the mountain of Medusas at Ground Zero in Manaus. They remembered this, and Kahaku asked how they would defend themselves if the Petri beam could attack in multiple waves. According to Tsukasa, multi-stage attacks has a fatal flaw. If it decided to fire consecutive waves of Petri beams, the second, third, and subsequent waves would be delayed. There was no point to that. This meant that after the initial attack, there needed to be a countdown before the next one. Before the next Medusa could unleash another wave of light, they needed to act. They showed another weapon they would use. Kahaku was impressed when she saw it. According to Senku, that was their second and final special item. They prepared to test it on the Medusas that were there. Yo used the item first for testing. When he fired it, a net emerged. Everyone was impressed when they saw it and the powerful explosion it released. That was their ultimate secret weapon against Medusa, the grenade net launcher. Because of this, the 3 spacebound members practiced using the special item. They had practice Medusas in front of them, and Senku was very nervous about using it. Meanwhile, Kahaku was relaxed and focused. Nevertheless, they both missed their targets. On the other hand, Ryusui was serious and managed to hit all their targets. Senku commented that spacebound Ryusui was really taking his job seriously. Kahaku thought this was because he knew he couldn't rely on their shooting skills, so he was taking charge as a proper captain. Therefore, they needed to prove they weren't useless. Ryusui had his game face on for this. That night, while everyone was asleep, Ryusui went out. In his thoughts, he couldn't ignore the elephant in the room. He admitted there was a better pilot than him, who was also the world's greatest marksman. He went to the falls where only those who had fought for the kingdom of science knew about that hidden chamber. Ryusui climbed up using a rope toward where their mightiest warriors had once rested. There was even a caution tape barrier, but he broke through it. The one he went to see there was none other than the stone statue of Stanley Snyder. For the Kingdom of Science's war against Y-Man, Ryusui really knew the truth that the best candidate as the most capable pilot for the 3 astronauts wasn't him, but Stanley. That night, Ryusui returned to his room and admired his scale model of the Senku 11. Ryusui still had the same passion as when he was a child. He wasn't content just seeing the scale model of his ship, and he also wanted to see its real version one day. Ryusui continued looking at the Senku 11 scale model while imagining seeing it soon as a real spacecraft. Then Senka suddenly passed by outside Ryusui's cabin carrying blueprints, so Ryusui called him to the window. Ryusui said he had a question for Senku in the form of a parable, where he was a knight in a medieval kingdom. Senku was surprised and wondered about what this out-of-nowhere question was about. Then Ryusui just continued his parable. As a young and dashing knight, you are courting the palace princess, and you tell her you want to have a future together. But there was a dilemma. The princess had a more suitable suitor who was a prince from the neighboring kingdom, and their marriage would bring peace to the entire land. After mentioning the parable, Ryusui asked Senku what his move would be as a science pro. Senku just became more confused by what Ryusui was saying as he continued staring at his scale model. And when Senku saw that, he realized that what Ryusui told him was related to their last discussion about the possibility of an aerial battle when they reached the moon. Senku just leaned against the window while Ryusui stayed quiet in his chair. Ryusui also took off his captain hat and placed it on the table. Then Senku gave his answer to the question. He said that a science pro is a man of efficiency. So if there was someone else more fit than him for a job or position, of course he would pass that duty to them. Ryusui smiled at what Senku said as if content with what he heard. Next, Senku laughed and said Ryusui already knew his answer before he asked him. Ryusui said Senku's way of calling him out was rude, and we can also see that Sunrise had caught up with their conversation. A few moments later, we suddenly see Zeno extremely shocked in disbelief. And with him now at the top of the waterfall were Senku, Ryusui, and Gen. The 4 of them had just finished discussing choosing the right person for a certain job, and while turned away, Zeno asked the 3 if they should expect any objections. Gen thought deeply while observing Zeno. He noticed that he was playing cool to the max. When Zeno could no longer hold back his emotions, he just hid his face from people. Now Gen knew that Senku inherited this behavior from Zeno. Zeno faced the 3 and admitted he was really shocked by their proposal. Then he threatened them and said Stanley was the ultimate soldier, and if they joined forces, they could repeat their attempt to conquer the whole world. But Ryusui was just confident saying the plan to conquer the world wouldn't work anymore because many backups and operations were ready. And besides that, a man of science is a man of efficiency. Because of this, Ryusui believed they could trust Zeno. But Senku just scratched his ear and said some of them would push back against their risky decision. Zeno just looked at the horizon while thinking. Then he told Senku and Ryusui to tell the malcontents that Zeno threatened to sabotage their rocket engines if they didn't revive Stanley. But Ryusui rejected this idea and said they would just tell everyone the truth. He added that Zeno didn't need to burden himself anymore with the villain's role. Ryusui said that whether Zeno liked it or not, he was now a citizen of the Kingdom of Science, and he was also one of their leaders. So the four went down the waterfall to announce the news to everyone. The people gave a violent reaction. Kahaku couldn't believe Senka's plans for Stanley, and Ginro was scared of the idea of waking him. Chelsea couldn't believe that Stanley would be made the rocket's pilot. Then Gin presented to everyone that Tsukasa would be Zeno's companion. Gin managed to quiet the people. Tsukasa explained that on paper, he was like guarding a VIP. Zeno added that if Stanley rebelled, Tsukasa would surely hurt him physically. Zeno also said he could be called a hostage. Ginro was still very stressed and asked why. Maybe as soon as Stanley woke up, he would just get a gun and shoot them all. But Ukyo said he wasn't worried, because Stanley was the type of soldier who followed orders and did everything his mission required of him. Stanley had proven himself in this regard, and it was unlikely he would suddenly change. But Ginro still wasn't convinced, and just said Stanley was scary and should be imprisoned forever. Meanwhile, Kahaku was just happy with the decision and said it was perfect. She added that their moon mission could be deadly, and Stanley himself would do this mission to save all of humanity. According to Kahaku, there was no better way for Stanley to atone for what he did. Then Chelsea became concerned for Ryusui, so she asked him if he was sure about their decision. Ryusui laughed and said he was sure because even though he was an ace pilot, his shooting skills weren't enough. But Chelsea suddenly said that wasn't what she meant to ask. Her real question was if Ryusui was sure, because Chelsea knew how hyped Ryusui was about flying to the moon. Ryusui just turned away in response and stayed quiet. Now Senku and the others returned to the waterfall area, heading to where Stanley's statue was hidden. Ryusui showed excitement, saying who wouldn't want to get the greatest marksman alive to work for them. And while they were reviving Stanley, Ryusui said he was still the greediest guy the world's ever known. And after Stanley's stone shells broke, Zeno immediately explained the situation to him. And after they talked one-on-one, Zeno offered his friend a cigarette. Stanley thought for a moment and accepted it. And while lighting the cigarette in his mouth, he asked them what his mission was. Senka suddenly became pleased, saying he really liked how quickly people understood. Then, Zeno explained that Stanley was the type of person who would do any task he knew he could do. Professionals really understood immediately. Next, Zeno asked Stanley. Let's say Stanley had a 1-pound bullet piece that he fired, and its initial velocity was 600 meters per second. Considering that on the moon's surface, gravity and acceleration were only 1/6 of Earth's, and air resistance was 0. Zeno suddenly threw the Medusa he was holding to Stanley and continued the question that his target was a Medusa exactly 1 kilometer away. Stanley managed to catch the Medusa, and as an answer to Zeno's question, he said his firing angle should be 0.13 degrees. Senku was impressed because Stanley's math was correct. Senku even wondered if sheer intuition helped him figure out the number. Zeno suddenly asked Stanley if he was up to the task. Then Stanley suddenly held Zeno's cheek. Zeno gave no reaction to what his best friend did except for a stare. Then Stanley said, "Sure I am." Ryusui showed contentment in his smile that had sadness in his eyes. After a while, we can see that Ryusui just went to the firing range to practice shooting, and Francois followed him that night carrying a dinner tray. Ryusui told Francois that even though he lost his seat on the space rocket, he still needed to polish his shooting skills as a backup pilot. He said it was only right that he fulfill his duty. Then we can see Stanley just walking around near the firing range, and he suddenly saw Ryusui and Francois from afar, so he stopped. Francois approached Ryusui and acknowledged that Ryusui was still the same as she knew him. Ryusui set aside his personal desire in favor for a greater desire, and this was victory for mankind. Francois even praised Ryusui for his noble decision to relinquish his spot to Stanley. But Ryusui suddenly told Francois that she didn't need to comfort him anymore. Then Ryusui remembered his childhood, where he already had the same drive and desire when he was building the scale model of his dream ship. And we can also see Sai remembering the same memory while looking at the space rocket scale model. And after an extremely long struggle and hiding of emotions, Ryusui finally broke down and admitted to Francois that he really wanted his spot inside the space rocket to go to the moon. Next, he released all his suppressed emotions and cried intensely. Francois smiled in adoration at her master, and Stanley saw everything. After Ryusui cried everything out, he pointed his pistol at the practice targets again and suddenly bullets hit all the targets exactly in the center of their bullseyes. Ryusui and Francois were surprised by this, and Francois even thought those bullets came from Ryusui. The shooting of the targets was extremely skillful because of the long range, Francois said, but Ryusui just looked far away from behind them and said he wasn't the one who fired those shots. We can see that there was someone else holding a smoking pistol, and this was none other than Stanley. Stanley didn't approach Ryusui and Francois anymore and just walked away. And now it was official that Senku, Kahaku, and Stanley Snyder were the selected 3 for their moon mission. After some time during preparations, we can see Kahaku having her perfect figure measured using the body casting method with polymer clay. And Yuzuriha herself was doing this to Kahaku. At the side of the room, we can see different body casts while Stanley was observing what Senku was writing on the blueprints. Suika was amazed, along with Gin, when she saw what they were doing and asked if they were making some kind of clothing. Gin told Suika that the outfits they were making seemed to be for Senku, Stanley, and Kahaku. So this meant they were constructing spacesuits now. And to achieve this, they needed to utilize fluorite and silica sand for silicone rubber. They also needed petroleum, electricity, and salt to make vinyl made from polyvinyl chloride from chlorine and naphtha. Ukyo brought up what Senku previously mentioned as the 3 sacred treasures for their moon mission. And these were the 3: spacesuits, rocket engines, and spaceship. Because of this, Kahaku asked Ukyo if this meant they were ready to go and face Y-Man now. Meanwhile, we can see Chrome with Suika in a separate office studying a chart about using vinyl. Chrome was still wondering what the vinyl stuff mentioned here was for. Taiju commented because he understood that the Ishigami villagers had never heard about this before. Magma got angry at Yo because he thought Yo was laughing at them and thinking they shouldn't laugh at things primitive people didn't know. Yo noticed Magma was getting angry at him and knew what he was thinking, so he said he wasn't saying anything at all. He also said Chrome was 10 billion times smarter than him when it came to science. The Kingdom of Science's base had greatly improved, and they had built a radar, buildings, and silo. Nikki told Senku that it was funny to realize they made a rocket ship before making a simple thing like vinyl. But Senku said that before they could make that, they first needed an oil refinery. Gin agreed because their order of reinventing things was really topsy-turvy. Senku acknowledged that this was because people from different parts of the world were helping them develop literal rocket science. So the Kingdom of Science could ignore other less advanced things. Then Senku suddenly went quiet and thought deeply. Next, he scratched his ear again and asked his companions if they were interested in last-minute crafting projects before the scheduled day of the moon launch. Because according to Senku, they could now make almost anything they wanted. Senku's people gave an explosive reaction. They all simultaneously requested different items from Senku. Yuzuriha asked for a washing machine, Minami, a video camera, and Ryusui asked for a slot machine, microwave oven, jacuzzi, and even a wine cellar. Gin commented because Ryusui had so many desires. Some even asked for a PlayStation 5, protein powder, and robot maid, while Taiju was shy about expressing his wish. Senku was surprised by them and said it wasn't possible to fulfill all their requests. Ryusui answered and said he desired everything. In the following days, while the rocket ship construction wasn't finished yet, the Kingdom of Science focused first on quality of life inventions. And for their first invention to make, Senku was with Kaseki creating a box-type tech that looked like an old television screen. Senku said that because they had experience making cell phones and radar, this was just like what they were doing now using electromagnetic waves. They just needed a metal box and it should emit waves inside that would bounce around. We can see they put a bowl of rice inside it. Then, when the lid opened, steam suddenly came out from inside and this surprised Chrome and the other Ishigami villagers. The bowl of rice was now steaming hot because that box was actually a microwave oven. Chrome, Suika, and Ruri were amazed because it managed to heat up cold rice in just 1 minute without using fire. Senku explained that the rice heated up because microwaves excited the water molecules inside the food. It was just like television signals that get worse when it rains. It's like you're just zapping tiny raindrops in the food. Then Ryusui snapped his fingers and said, "Speaking of leftovers," in reference to the leftover rice. Ryusui said they could still use the excess vinyl used for making spacesuits. They just needed to stretch it out very thin to make plastic wrap. Francois showed that she had already used plastic wrap for preserving food. Nikki commented that they were back to 21st century dining. Gin said he thought they were prioritizing food-related crafting to sustain Ryusui's noble desires. Next, they made a washing machine. Senku shouted that it was just a giant bucket with a motor for spinning. Yuzuriha was overjoyed. Next, an 8mm video camera. Senku explained that they just needed water, sodium hydroxide, and vinegar to make cellophane. Minami was very happy. Next, someone asked for pocket hand warmers and Senku said they just needed simple rust to use for heating. Chrome was excited learning and helping Senku craft many different requests, and they could make all sorts of things very quickly. Finally, Taiju made his request. But before Taiju could finish speaking, Senku beat him to it by mentioning that he wanted a smartphone. Gin got nervous because they heard this request again from Taiju that he had been repeatedly requesting over the years. Taiju was surprised by Senku's reaction that seemed positive. Gin got nervous and doubted if they could really make a smartphone now. Tsukasa and Ukiyo had the same reaction. Yuzuriha was excited to know if this was really true now. Senku gave a cool look and said they would now make a liquid crystal touchscreen for a smartphone. Chelsea couldn't believe this, while Gin asked where they would find this so-called liquid crystal. Senku explained that it wasn't a type of crystal in liquid form because there was no such thing actually. A crystal was expected to be solid, but the component they needed had to flow like a liquid. It needed to be in a state between solid and liquid, that's why it was called liquid crystal. While making this in the laboratory, Senku explained to Gin and Chelsea that there were many ways to make this. And one easy example was utilizing n-butylanilene from aniline and toluene from petroleum. Chelsea commented on its strange smell that was like Chinese food. Gin said there was nothing easy in Senku's example. Senku answered that it was obviously because of methoxybenzaldehyde, but Gin said there was nothing obvious about what Senku said. Kahaku, Chrome, and Suika were amazed watching Kaseki making glass panels using an automated machine. Senku explained the process. Start it first by using a glass panel with grooves, and pour liquid crystal on top. And when it fills the spaces of the grooves to make lines, they would then stick it to another glass panel with similar grooves but tilted 90 degrees. Because the liquid crystal was now sandwiched between vertical and horizontal grooves, it created a pathway for light. It was like a twisted tunnel that becomes lengthwise and crosswise. And whenever a button was pressed, they could give it a zap. We can see that whenever it receives an electric current, the twisted pathway disappears and becomes a direct path of light. The electricity can straighten out the liquid crystal, and this is why white spots and black spots appear. Kahaku was pleased to see that what Senku said was correct. Gin commented that what Senku said made sense in theory, but he still couldn't understand it. Kaseki said that even he didn't understand it, he just built it. All he knew was that the liquid crystal becomes dark whenever electricity flows through it. Now Senku finished building the LCD, so he placed 2 sheets of vinyl on top of the screen. Chrome commented about the usefulness of vinyl. Senku continued explaining and said that whenever fingers touched the screen, it would have an electric reaction. And bingo! They had completed the liquid crystal touchscreen, so they now had a legitimate smartphone. Senku let Taiju use it first, and Taiju was overjoyed when he held it. He couldn't believe he was holding a smartphone. Others had shocked reactions, and Yo was also very happy because its size was small too. But when we zoom out, we can see that for the touchscreen LCD to work, it was connected via cables to an extremely large backpack. And this backpack was the real brain power and battery of their smartphone. People just fell over in extreme shock because the smartphone wasn't small after all. Sai said that phone was also really a true computer. Senku told Taiju to enjoy his 40-kilogram smartphone. Taiju said yes, as long as the part he was holding was still pocket size. Sai was happy to demo to Senku and Taiju that their smartphone could text, email, and play video games. Nikki was impressed by this and said it was a slick smartphone. Ukiyo agreed. Chelsea cried in admiration of Senku. She thought he worked hard making the LCD just for his best friend, but Kahaku told her that Senku had an ulterior motive in making it. Senku directly agreed, and everyone wasn't surprised by this. Senku entered the construction site of their spaceship and said they would fill it with many touchscreens inside, because bronze tube televisions easily break in turbulence. Besides that, LCD had lighter mass and smaller volume too. This was important in minimizing total weight because it was crucial for their piecemeal round-trip rocket. So now they had built a spaceship cockpit. One night, the giant rocket engine arrived by ship from South America, and Kahaku told Suika that their making of the rocket ship was like making a chain, one link at a time. From start to finish, everything was connected to their old and familiar scientific roadmap. In a flashback, we can see Senku and Taiju standing as Adam and Eve of the Stone World generation, and they successfully built civilization from scratch. Senku spoke and acknowledged how far they had come compared to where they started from just one stone. Zeno also spoke and said their grand launch had arrived. This chart now shows the entire scientific journey of Senku and the whole kingdom of science. Everything started from stone tools, fire, and iron until they made gears. Because of this, they made a water wheel that provided electricity so they could make batteries and electromagnetic waves using crude oil for making motors. And from vinyl and rubber, they made spacesuits. Because of Tochu tea, they made internet. They now had computers too. And using many different types of rare metals and minerals, they had also built a spaceship and rocket engines, which when combined would let them reach their ultimate crafting goal of a moon rocket. So now that they had finished assembling all the parts, it was time to go to the moon and finally put an end to their fight. The 3 astronauts went through long training first, where from an oil platform in the sea they would rope down underwater to simulate the scenario of spacecraft maintenance in zero gravity. This was also a good testing ground for their spacesuit and team coordination. Stanley always finished first in their rounds, followed by Kahaku, and Senku was last. One day, the other launcher parts for the space rocket that they outsourced arrived, and Chrome and Suika were together looking at the calendar to mark their launch day. After a few days, launch day arrived. They had managed to fully assemble the space rocket ship and set it up at the right angle. They had also set up a decontaminated gangway where Senku, Kahaku, and Stanley could walk from the White Room to the spacecraft. And while the 3 walked slowly, all the citizens of the Kingdom of Science surrounding the outside of the gangway kept shouting and cheering. Then Ruri and Suika approached Kahaku. The sisters touched foreheads, and Ruri told Kahaku not to be reckless. Ruri also asked Kahaku to promise her that she would return safely, and Kahaku agreed. Chrome approached Senku and said not to tell him he was getting cold feet now. Senku laughed and asked if he really knew him. Next, Zeno approached to send off Stanley. He told him this was their fateful showdown against Y-Man. Zeno said that though neither he nor Stanley planned for this to happen, Zeno's science and Stanley's battle prowess would combine again to wage war. Stanley said he wasn't sure about what Zeno was saying, because now this wasn't just about the 2 of them. Zeno realized Stanley was right, and Senku was impressed. Zeno agreed because he recognized that now he and Stanley were joined by all of Senku's people. And not just that, but the whole world. Before Zeno returned to his station, he handed a small box to Stanley. He explained that smoking wasn't allowed inside the spaceship, so he gave Stanley some chewing tobacco shaped like cigarettes for the trip. Stanley happily accepted this. Next, Tsukasa also approached the astronauts to talk to and encourage Kahaku. According to him, the combination of Kahaku's skills in martial arts together with Stanley's skills in marksmanship brought certainty that they could handle any fight that came, because they were the ultimate fighting force. Then, Ryusui went to Stanley and told him, in a jokingly friendly way, that he stole his ride to space. So, he expected Stanley to do his job well. He should defeat Y-Man and return safely too. Then Ryusui decided to shorten his words, so he just asked Stanley a simple question, "Can you do it?" And after the 2 looked each other in the eye, Stanley answered Ryusui directly and said, "Yeah, I can." Then they fist-bumped as a sign of respect and brotherhood. Next, we can see Luna going crazy and throwing a tantrum. She said she couldn't bear to see Senku leave for space so soon, because they had just met again after a long time. His space mission was dangerous too. But Luna quickly regained her composure, even though she was still trembling with worry. She contradicted her feelings with words and said she wasn't worrying, and sometimes she even wondered if she was too smooth for her own good. In the end, she said she was sure Senku would come back to her after he succeeded in the mission. Senku told Luna to just relax, because humans only had a 5% death rate in space throughout history. Luna shouted back that what Senku said wasn't reassuring. Meanwhile, Suika looked at the tower-like structure of the rocket ship's launch station. She strengthened herself because this was their long-awaited moon launch day. She felt like it was a big party, but she couldn't help worrying that their launch might fail like their many failed unmanned trial runs. The people became scared and nervous when they heard what Suika said, but Gin just showed confidence. He told everyone everything was okay, and they shouldn't worry, especially since they would petrify the 3 cadets first before takeoff. So even if they exploded in the sky and shattered, they would just put together the fragments of their statues and revive them. Taiju was happy at first, but he suddenly stopped when he realized what Gin said wasn't good news. Senku told Gin his words weren't convincing because even the big oaf Taiju wasn't convinced. But Gin still pushed his point that everything would be okay. Then he bowed his head and mentioned again that everything was just fine. As if he was also convincing himself, Taiju also strengthened himself, and Senku saw this. Then Taiju suddenly shouted and said there was no way they would fail. And if the worst happened, he was willing to find all of Senku's stony bits for Yuzuriha to reassemble him, even if it took them decades. Senku was pleased and said he knew they were both hardworking, so he knew they would really try that. But Taiju disagreed and said they wouldn't just try, but would really do it, and Senku could count on them. Senku went quiet for a moment and smiled, before agreeing with Taiju. Then all the Ishigami villagers also approached to give Senku moral support. We can also see that Kokuyo, Jasper, and Ruri were among those cheering for Senku, Stanley, and Kahaku. The cheers were so loud they could be heard from a distant perspective outside the island. Next, we can see Joel, who went to Kaseki. Even though Kaseki wore a face mask, we can still see tears of joy in his eyes. It was their first time meeting in person, but they managed to recognize each other. Even though Kaseki was inside the gangway and Joel was outside, they still managed to share a toast with each other as fellow engineers of their stone world. After a few moments, they retrieved the Medusa from inside the isolated container. Kaseki also got a fresh diamond battery and said many years had passed since the last time he used this. Now it was time for the Medusa to wake up again. Then Joel and Kaseki worked together to install the diamond battery in their Medusa. And while they did this quickly, the people around were amazed by their precision and combined speed. Next, Kaseki handed the Medusa to Senku. From a bird's eye view, we can see a peaceful sunrise shining on the anchored Perseus and Treasure Island where the launch pad stood. The 3 cadets proceeded to enter the heating rocket ship. Kaseki seated the 3 in their module, and when he moved away, Senku activated the Medusa. It released a Petri beam with a diameter of 5 meters. Its diameter exceeded Senku's pod's enclosure, so the light could still be seen from the Perseus, where those who saw it became nervous. And after a few seconds, there was dead silence in the surroundings. Then Yo spoke from the command center and asked Zeno what they could do if the Medusa misfired again like what happened before. Zeno said they couldn't ascertain its cause, nor could they replicate the phenomenon. And because they had no alternate method, they just had to accept the risk that it might activate again in the coming days. In agreement, Ukyo said they had nothing else to do but cling to hope. We can now see that the petrification of Senku, Stanley, and Kahaku was successful. Meanwhile, Minami started live broadcasting on the Ryu TV channel and announced that the moon rocket launch was near. So on to the next step, the 10-second countdown for launch began. Magma, Mantle, and the whole world watching the live stream felt intense nervousness during the countdown. Even Zeno from the command center was anxious. At the 6th second, we can see the rocket engines heating up to the max in the launch pad area. The rumbling inside the space pods are already getting intense. But Senku couldn't feel this. In his mind, he said this was always how it felt during petrification. Extremely quiet with nothing heard from the outside world. He couldn't feel any vibrations either. But in Senku's mind, if he trusted that everything was going according to his and Zeno's plan, his assumption that they were at the 5th second of the countdown was correct. Then Senku suddenly laughed in his mind because he remembered something that happened when he was hit by the massive Petri beam. For 3,700 years he stayed awake because of his non-stop counting of every second that passed while he remained petrified. But now the opposite was happening because he was counting down in his mind. At the 2nd second, We can see the imagery in Senku's mind where doll versions of them could be seen floating in space with Taiju and Yuzuriha. At the final second of the countdown, the only thing in Senku's mind was this idea. Using humanity's wits together with the power of science, Senku and his companions managed to reverse the world's petrification back to point zero. And now they were departing from that very world. After the countdown, the rocket boosters began full throttle and the Senku 11 spacecraft flew into the air. But before we continue with the present story, let's backtrack from the time of pre-civilization before the Ice Age, where we can see that animals were still the dominant species on Earth. Next came the dawn of civilization, and after thousands of years, we can see humans' distant advancement in the time of the Roman Empire. But nothing would compare to now in the time of modern civilization of the industrial and technological age. And in this time, a smart child who extremely loved science was born. We know him as Senku. Even as a child, he already loved making his own science experiments and projects with his friend Taiju. And they also always experienced explosions. And here it is, the day of the first massive Petri beam phenomenon witnessed by Byakuya's space crew arrived. Everyone in the world remained statues. But after 3,700 years, Senku was depetrified as the very first original human to live in the new stone world, aside from Zeno. This was the time when Senku was called chief of Ishigami village, and he brought science to transform the natives' lives. Then the time came when they and Zeno built the stone world's very first rocket engine. All of this was running through Senku's mind while he was still petrified inside the space pod. Then he also remembered his post-war mentorship with Zeno. Now, we can see the world's memory when Byakuya was still alive and still collecting platinum from the river even though he was old. His whole life, he believed humanity would make a comeback, and the time would come when people would eat ramen in space again. Byakuya's faith in this was absolute. Senku woke up from that memory while floating in space inside their space pod, and he seemed surprised when he suddenly woke up in front of the window where he could clearly see outer space. He left his spacesuit and changed clothes. Now they were halfway on their journey to the moon. It wasn't long before Senku also realized he was alone now drifting in outer space. Senku wondered why he was the only one awake and his companions were still petrified, especially since they needed Stanley now to pilot the docking controls. He wondered if there might be a problem with their resurrection watches. Then suddenly a voice spoke to Senku from the loudspeakers inside the space pod. The speaker assumed Senku was awake, and Senku recognized that Zeno was speaking. Senku told Zeno that he realized their gear wasn't broken, but Zeno deliberately made it happen that Senku would wake up alone first. Then Senku smiled and showed true happiness. Back in New Ishigami Village, we can see Zeno in the command center talking to Senku via radio, and Chelsea and Chrome were currently here too. Chelsea was impressed by Zeno's explanation that liquid flow wasn't normal in zero gravity, so their revival fluid might glitch. As a precaution, he released Senku's revival fluid a bit earlier. Senku complained because they could have told him about that precaution, but Senku suddenly stopped speaking when he realized the real reason why Zeno did this. Zeno smiled when he noticed Senku had already realized his reason. So Senku just told his mentor, "Sure, let's leave it at that." Gin was pleased with what he witnessed and just stayed quiet. Gin understood that Zeno and Byakuya used to be friends, along with the other NASA astronauts Lillian, Daria, Connie, Shamil, and Yakov. The real reason why Zeno set Senku's revival time earlier was to give Senku a moment of solitude in space, where he could freely weep and grieve alone. After a few moments, Stanley was also revived. When Stanley woke up, he found Senku still staring out the window. So Stanley quietly changed clothes and got a stick of chewing tobacco that Zeno gave. Because of Stanley's lack of shock, Senku immediately realized he knew about Zeno's plan to advance Senku's revival clock. So Senku asked Stanley about this. He asked if that was their plan, and he said they were like two creepy old dudes who doted on him. Stanley smiled at Senku's joke. Then he asked Senku if he had become soft in the head, because Stanley was just a soldier following orders. Senku laughed and again said, "Let's leave it at that." Zeno first told a story from the command center. During the 20th century, the scientists' original plans were to make a spaceship without any windows. But they say the astronauts protested against this, And this was because seeing outer space from the window with their own eyes was very vital for the crew's mental health. Stanley asked Zeno if their oxygen levels were okay. Zeno answered that because the labor needed for the docking procedure was still an unknown factor, he sent them lots of spare oxygen. So even if they wanted to wake their other companion now, they could do that without risk. The two suddenly looked at each other awkwardly as if they both forgot they had another companion. And right after Kahaku woke up, there were immediately quick motions inside the space pod. Kahaku was so excited to see outer space for the first time that she pressed her whole face against the glass window. Kahaku was also excited to experience zero gravity, and she said her weight felt so light. Senku told her she was getting too excited. Next, Senku took out packed meals from their food stock. Senku said Francois herself cooked their food and packed it using vinyl packs. From the image alone, we know what kind of food this is. Their meal for the day was space ramen, and it was even gleaming while Senku presented it. The three didn't seem to have trouble adjusting to how to eat ramen in zero gravity. Kahaku thoroughly enjoyed the space ramen they were eating, and Senku gave a fun fact about it. He said their ramen's flavor was exactly the same as the ramen that Byakuya's group ate in the 21st century. Kahaku felt empathy for what Senku said. She told Senku her realization that like Senku's father, they were also eating the same meal in outer space now. Then she asked Senku if it was possible that the space station where Byakuya came from was still floating somewhere in space near them. But Senku said no, because there was no one left in the world who could control and maintain the station. It fell thousands of years ago to Earth's surface like pieces of shooting stars. Kahaku became sad at what Senku said, but Senku broke the silence and just laughed. He told the two to forget what happened before. Like what Senku said, the old space station was also launched into space as piecemeal. This meant the parts of the whole space station would only dock when everything was in Earth orbit. We can now see the second rocket ship that also successfully launched from Earth to a location near Senku. Chrome and Suika were operating this one. Senku explained that in this time, their creations would combine in space. Wonder and amazement could be seen on Kahaku's face, while intense determination could be seen on Senku and Stanley. While Senku was saying they were done blasting away from their tiny stone world and now they were going to a spacefaring civilization. And now, we can see that both pods A and B of Senku 11 have successfully combined and docked with each other. And this was thanks to Stanley and his super marksmanship and mad pilot skills, making the male and female ports connect perfectly. Kahaku congratulated Stanley in broken English, saying that even without up or down in space, Stanley still managed to connect the tips of the ships. Stanley answered that it was too early to celebrate because they only had 2 units out of 5. But even so, Senku still gave good news to Zeno. And because of the 10 billion% success of the first docking, their friends watching inside the command center also celebrated. Then Senku's face suddenly showed confusion, so Kahaku told him to show at least a little excitement. But Senku answered that wasn't the issue. He said they should expect a bigger reaction from their friends in the command center. Meanwhile, Taiju was so hyped up that bodily fluids squirted in his face as he celebrated. Senku's prediction about his friend was right. And when Zeno heard what Senku said, he looked behind him and saw that was exactly what Taiju was doing. Chrome wondered about what Senku said, so he asked him if he couldn't hear Taiju shouting. This was when Zeno realized they had a serious problem. Senku was also shocked when he realized he couldn't hear any comms from Earth on their radio. So while their space pod was drifting in space, Senku and Kahaku went out to continue their mission anyway. They disconnected the booster engine portion of the second unit so it could move itself away to give way for Unit 3. While Unit 3 was still far away, Kahaku already spotted it and said it would arrive quickly at their location. Stanley praised Kahaku about the info he heard that she had 20 to 1.8 vision, which is miles better than 20/20. Kahaku said they could count on her for anything they needed to find, even from the docking screen. After a while, the third unit got close to Senku's space pod. Kahaku had returned inside the space pod, and she opened the docking screen. But she was shocked to see it couldn't show a clear image and was almost just a black screen. Kahaku apologized to Senku because she thought she broke the screen with her strong grip, but Senku clarified she wasn't at fault. Senku knew somewhere inside their ship they were experiencing an electrical problem. But they needed to decide quickly what they should do, especially since the third unit was getting closer and closer to them. Even though they couldn't see half of the screen's whole image, they still needed to dock Unit 3 successfully. So Kahaku asked Stanley if he could do this using just his skills. But Stanley just stared at the ship's control joystick and suddenly grabbed it hard while saying, "Yeah, I can." And when the third unit touched the second unit, we could hear a satisfying kish sound. This was a major success. So just to make sure it was still properly docked, the three astronauts went out first to thoroughly inspect their spaceship. And when the three returned inside, they were happy with what they pulled off. Senku immediately tried to find the source of their electrical problem. Then he was surprised and worried when he saw it. He even laughed a little and cursed when he told the two he had found the problem's source. The two became nervous at what they heard. Then we can see a super thin, worm-shaped stone tangled within the circuitry of soldered resistors on a circuit board. Kahaku asked if this was a small stick, but Stanley noticed it looked like a stone fragment that came from a strand of human hair, and somehow it managed to squeeze itself inside the circuit board. Kahaku asked how a piece of petrified hair got here. Then she was suddenly shocked when she remembered Yo, who came in and bothered them earlier. The problem was he wasn't wearing an insulated suit. So a strand of hair from his head just suddenly fell and slipped into the circuit board. So when Senku activated the Petri beam before launch, the hair strand also turned to stone. Senku was under intense stress and said trial and error was how they made progress with science. So they should have moved immediately after being petrified, because the explanation for how something becomes problematic only comes after it shows itself. And while Senku was still speaking, the transistors being pinched by the stone hair strand suddenly broke and exploded. Because of this, the circuit board was completely burned. While the broken transistors were flying in the air, Kahaku noticed the image displayed on the docking screen had become completely pitch black. But they were running out of time because the fourth unit was arriving and had released its outer shell, ready to dock. Stanley saw this from the window, so he asked Senku if he could fix the damage on time. But Senku explained their condenser was fried. He couldn't tell yet how severe the circuitry damage was, so what they needed to do now was swap the entire power supply circuit with a new one. But the problem was, this wasn't available in outer space. The fourth unit was just meters away from them, and they still couldn't do anything. Senku and Stanley were extremely worried because they still couldn't see any image from the docking screen. Then Kahaku stated the truth about their hopeless situation. No camera meant they needed to push through with the docking process without seeing anything. Then oxygen smoke suddenly came out from the fourth unit and its angle changed. Its path straightened by itself towards Senku's spaceship. Kahaku and Stanley were speechless when they saw this. Kahaku asked Stanley if her eyes were fooling her, because she seemed to see Unit 4 move by itself without a pilot. Stanley answered that Kahaku saw correctly. So according to Stanley, this meant someone might have hitched a ride on Unit 4. Senku explained that Unit 4 was their actual lunar lander unit, so it was big and someone could possibly fit themselves inside. Kahaku asked who among their friends would be reckless enough to do that. But Senku just smiled because he was 10 billion% sure that he knew only one person from the stone world who had the courage to do that. And this was none other than Ryusui. He laughed loudly in excitement and uttered the words, "Spaceborne at last. Outer space is mine, all mine." The people behind Zeno celebrated while he kept a poker face due to intense relief from the intense stress he felt. Senku, Kahaku, and Stanley's spirits were lifted when they learned their situation wasn't hopeless anymore. Sai was amazed at his brother's first words in space because this was what he expected. His brother hadn't changed. Francois was so happy for her master that she started getting teary-eyed. Nikki asked Zeno if he thought Senku would get that Ryusui plan to pilot Unit 4's docking himself, since Senku's incoming comms were still broken. Zeno said Nikki shouldn't worry because they were the most elegant trio of astronauts. Ryusui attempted to dock his unit. And while he was doing this, Stanley and Senku discussed that Ryusui needed to do a difficult maneuver because he lacked a reaction wheel in Unit 4. Kahaku wondered what they were talking about. A reaction wheel is a machine inside the spacecraft that uses spinning wheels to rotate the entire craft via gyroscopic principles. Stanley explained that it wasn't impossible for Ryusui to pilot Unit 4 by revving the engines, but he would burn a lot of precious fuel. Then Ryusui's spacecraft suddenly moved in a circular motion. The three were extremely surprised when they saw this. How could Ryusui adjust its angle? The people from the command center were also surprised how this happened. So Chrome asked Zeno if he had quickly made a control unit for Unit 4 earlier. But Zeno said that was impossible even for him. Both Zeno's group and Senka's group were wondering how Ryusui could control the craft without using a reaction wheel. When we look inside, we can see that Ryusui himself was quickly spinning inside Unit 4, and his physical motion's momentum was making the spacecraft rotate. Ryusui told everyone that when we desire to get something we don't have yet, it's only right that we make it ourselves. Hence, Ryusui himself was his own gyroscope, a human reaction wheel. Stanley and Kahaku couldn't believe what they learned, while Senka's stomach was hurting from laughing at Ryusui's crazy actions. Gin couldn't believe it either, and Zeno was extremely impressed by Ryusui's ability. Because of this, Unit 4 also successfully docked with the rest of Senku's spaceship. And because of the intense events, Senku decided to first get a marker to write Einstein's famous formula on his new clothes. So now they are all ready for the challenges coming their way. Next, the three welcomed Ryusui inside the spacecraft and gave him a warm welcome. And because of their impressive performances, the four of them did a group high five, or rather, high four. Gin was pleased, and the people in the command center also celebrated because they got through the stressful moments. And Gin mentioned that in the end, Ryusui still made it to space. Nikki reiterated what Gin said using Ryusui's own words. Space is now his. Gin told Nikki he knew everything that happened wasn't coincidence. Francois agreed with this and said Ryusui really anticipated this. This was why Ryusui continued his demanding training and persevered every day, even though he wasn't part of the three cadets anymore. And this was because desire is noble. Afterward, Ryusui handed Senku the replacement power supply circuit board he brought. Kahaku and Stanley also recognized it looked like the one that broke earlier. Senku was overjoyed because this made his repair work easier. According to him, nothing could be easier in the repair process than just swapping out a new part to replace the broken one. Because of this, Senku was very thankful to the control team from Earth. So now the spacecraft's incoming radio comms were repaired, and they could hear Zeno's voice again. Zeno asked them if his gift was elegant. He also explained that they could still hear them from space, so they knew they really needed a replacement circuit board, and they quickly sent it with Ryusui. Gin was stunned when he heard what happened, because this meant Ryusui just suddenly joined Unit 4's journey, and Chelsea and Suika were impressed because Ryusui just rode awake from launch until they reached near the moon. Meanwhile, inside the spaceship, Ryusui first borrowed the Medusa from Senku and said that if he was petrified first, he would just be like cargo. That way, he wouldn't need to join those using the ship's life support resources. Senku agreed and said he should just expect to be cozy inside. Because of all the changes that happened in the whole operation and the many new variables, Sai needed to recalculate many numbers. But he was happy doing his job. After a short while, Senku used the Medusa again to petrify all four of them inside. And after this, the spacecraft went on autopilot. While the four were still asleep, Zeno, Sai, and Ukyo were in charge of watching over the Senku 11's navigation. Using radio wave transmission, they could measure the Senku 11's current position based on transmission time. Zeno also explained that they got additional info from the radio waves using principles of Doppler effect. And this analysis gave them the spaceship's current speed. Taiju asked what Doppler effect was. So Chelsea explained to him that it was like when someone experiences an ambulance passing by with active speakers, its sound tone changes as it gets closer until it passes you and gets farther and farther away. Its sound waves stretch as it moves away, and this is the Doppler effect itself. Because of this, they could track the astronauts' movements in space, and based on that receive readings of their speed and position. Gin was delighted because waves were always positively useful for them. This was also like waves from cell phones and microwave ovens. Based on the data, Ukyo said Senku's current speed was 38,000 kilometers per hour. Yo was surprised by how high this value was. Minami also mentioned that even 21st century airplanes only reached 1,000 kilometers per hour. Tsukasa was impressed when they realized that spaceships were still really the fastest vehicles invented by humankind. After several days, The Senku 11 got closer and closer to the moon, and Kahaku and the three remained statues. The scientists in the command center worked non-stop day and night. And even though Chrome and others were falling asleep from extreme drowsiness, Zeno managed to stay alert and awake. After 3 days, Senku's scheduled depetrification activated, and they and Kahaku woke up. After Senku checked the ship's status, Kahaku looked outside the window and was extremely surprised and amazed at what she saw. Their current location was very close to the moon, and awe and wonder could be seen on Kahaku's face. She couldn't believe she was seeing the moon this close. Ryusui looked at the space sextant to navigate. Meanwhile, in the command center, Gin was surprised their astronauts were still using a sextant in the spaceship now. Gin was also holding a traditional sextant made by Chrome. Kinro asked if that was the tool they used for location when they were at sea. Chrome said he was correct, and they could use it in outer space too. They could know their position via glancing at the stars. Suika was pleased and said this was one of Chrome's creations using his flashes of inspiration. But Chrome acknowledged that he and Suika had the idea to make that as the newbie scientist tag team. Then Zeno explained this was an elegant low-tech solution that humanity also used during the early Apollo missions. Chrome and Suika fell to the floor when they realized their invention wasn't new anymore. But Ukyo still praised the primitive tool because it could still help their friends navigate to the moon. Zeno mentioned this became even more important when their space crew reached the far side of the moon, because at that time, all their communications would be cut off, so they would need to rely on their own eyes and measurements to navigate in space. After the spaceship orbited to the far side of the moon area, Kahaku noticed it was very bumpy and lumpy. So Senku explained that only one side of the moon was always visible from Earth, so normal people didn't know that the moon's backside was an ugly mess. All the craters it had served as evidence that the moon took many meteorite strikes to protect Earth. Kahaku was amazed to learn that, unbeknownst to them all, it had long been protecting the people of the Earth. Ryusui spoke about their mission, regarding which of them four would step foot on this guardian deity. According to Ryusui, in case they had problems with the trip and it became a risky mission, only 3 of them should be sent to the lunar lander. Senku presented himself to stay in the command module as the science guy, but Ryusui rejected this. He claimed the command module, and the 3 were surprised and impressed by Ryusui's authoritative display. He explained that because Senku represented all the scientists of their new world, he should be one of those who would walk on the moon. Zeno and all other scientists in the command center were also surprised by Ryusui's inspirational words. Senku just looked down contemplating while Kahaku shyly asked Ryusui if he was sure about his decision. Wasn't it his desire to have the honor of walking on the moon? But Ryusui just laughed and said he was a captain, first and foremost. He said 3 should go down to the moon, and only 1 should stay to steer the ship. He added that it was true he wanted to play every role, but when he needed to choose, he would choose the most exclusive trophy. After this, Senku and Ryusui just looked at each other because they both understood that Ryusui really deliberately chose to stay on the ship. And this was the same reason why he relinquished his position to Stanley in the first place. So Senku just said again, "Sure, let's leave it at that." And the 3 continued to put on spacesuits and transfer to the lunar lander. Next, the lunar lander unit also detached from the spaceship and released its forelegs. It hovered down to the moon's surface using the moon's weak gravity, and after a while, it released a little oxygen boosters to adjust speed and trajectory. Gin told everyone that the whole world was watching and listening to the moon mission events. So he asked Senku if he had any first words to give for their moon landing. We can see that what Gin said was true because all people of all ages all over the world were excitedly watching. Then Taiju suddenly shouted because he had an idea, from his flashes of inspiration, about what Senku should say as first words. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Chrome and other Ishigami villagers were extremely amazed by how beautiful Taiju's words were. But Gin immediately scolded Taiju because he just mentioned Neil Armstrong's exact first words as the first human to walk on the moon. Taiju got a headache when he realized that was why those words were already in his mind. So he apologized too. Chrome, Maz, and Sai gave successive suggestions based on their unique personalities. Chrome said, "The moon's bad." Kurisame was irritated at Ma's suggestion that was about cute girlfriends again, and Sai still had video games in mind, so his suggested phrase was, "Achievement unlocked. First moon landing." Ukyo commented that what they were doing suddenly became an improv. Gin said they should let their astronauts decide what to say, but Senku just said he wasn't thinking about what he should say. His radio contacts got angry because they expected that from him too. But while the lunar lander was in landing motion, Senku still had time to speak. He said that compared to the 20th century moon landings, their current mission was more meaningful. When the lunar lander's door opened, Senku continued speaking. If they failed in their fight against Y-Man, humanity was doomed. But if they managed to win the fight, the secrets of petrification science would be theirs. And with all of this in mind, Senku finally mentioned his first words while going down to the moon's surface. "With all of humanity on the line, we're taking this first giant step into the battle for future science, so get excited." After he spoke, he perfectly timed taking his first step on the moon. In the next scene, as soon as Senku and his companions set foot on the moon, he reflected in his thoughts that they had started anew in a primeval world, and they strived to reach the summit one step at a time, until at last they reached the moon's surface. The spectators watching their mission broadcast erupted in cheers, while Zeno commented that they would finally confront the unknown entity called Y-Man, though he added that they had limited weapons, such as the grenade net launcher Chrome pointed. Tsukasa agreed with that and mentioned that they should add their Medusa capsule to the list. While Kahaku was holding it, Chelsea was startled because she hadn't thought of it immediately. She explained that sound doesn't travel in the vacuum of space, so the Medusa wouldn't work in its normal way, which confused Kinro and Ginro about what that meant. Ryusui explained that the Petri beam was both a weapon and a healing lifeline. He explained that the capsule was filled with air, so the mic inside it could transmit their voices to activate the device. Kahaku was excited about this and almost activated it while explaining that they could throw it at the enemy and say 10 meters 1 second. But fortunately, Senku and Stanley stopped her in time. Because of this, she had a whoops moment and admitted she almost ruined their plan, which caused extraordinary anxiety among the people on Earth and prompted Gin to comment that Kahaku's presence bodes ill. After that, Stanley told them they could talk more later, to which Senku agreed and said there was no sense in wasting oxygen there, while Kahaku urged them to execute their mission hard and fast. While the three rode in the moon buggy, Minami asked if that was all and if there wasn't any profound sense of romance about being on the moon. Gin responded that they had one soldier, one efficiency aficionado, and one lady who goes hard and fast. The golden trio that prioritized speed. The three continued their journey across the moon's surface to search for Y-Man, and as they explored the area, Zeno informed them that their destination was the Taurus Littrow Valley, and Chelsea added that it was also the neck of the bunny of the moon. She explained that their satellite had confirmed an inexplicable dark stain on its surface. Stanley explained that they could be spotted by the enemy from afar in this tricked-out lunar rover, to which Senku replied that it was better than landing smack dab in the heart of darkness. Before long, with Kahaku's sharp eyes, she noticed something resembling an Apollo Elm shelter to their side. And when they looked more carefully, they also saw a USA flag that had deteriorated in color and turned white due to direct exposure to cosmic rays. Kahaku commented that it seemed Y-Man's location just happened to be close to the spot where humanity had left its flag. Senka grinned and said that something seemed off to Kahaku as well, and he pointed out that the moon was huge, so there must be a reason for this coincidence. Stanley warned them not to assume anything about this enemy as it could lead to their death. As they approached the shelter, we were shown what appeared to be a rover facing them. Stanley added that the only way to find out was to go there and see for themselves. Because of this, they decided to continue approaching. However, while doing so, Senku suddenly called out to Kahaku and requested her to unseal the Medusa capsule, which startled her. She asked if Senku was sure about that, and since when did he say please? Kahaku took out the Medusa capsule and asked if he really wanted her to open it, to which Senku agreed and asked her to hurry. Because of this, Kahaku began turning the capsule to open it, but before she could fully do so, Stanley quickly grabbed her wrist with a shocked expression. Senko also turned to her and asked in surprise what she was thinking, while Ukyo pointed out that Senko hadn't been speaking earlier. Kahaku's eyes widened in shock, And this reminded Ukyo of what happened to Gin and Yo even though they had placed the Medusa in a vacuum tube. Soon after, he realized that it was a fake transmission and that frequency was just mimicking Senku's voice. However, it was too late as Kahaku had already partially opened the capsule, and it began to glow. Y-Man eerily thanked them for unlocking it using Senku's voice. The Medusa clicked at this point, and because of that, Stanley quickly took action and crashed their buggy to propel them away from it. Senku tried to order Kahaku to throw it, but he quickly stopped when he saw that Kahaku was already in position to do so. After Kahaku gained momentum, she threw it powerfully into the air, and Senku commented that it was a perfect toss, courtesy of Kahaku's crazy physical prowess. Stanley also explained here that the moon's gravity was only 1/6 compared to what they were used to, which meant Kahaku's throwing distance was 6 times greater there, so he remarked that it wasn't bad. Before long, the Medusa began emitting an eerie glow, and it appeared to become like a firework in the sky while the three watched it. It was also clearly visible from the spaceship, causing concern among those in the control room and Ryusui. As Kahaku observed it, she noticed something again, which made her comment that it was finally within sight. It turned out they had gotten close to the ominous dark stain they had seen through the telescope, and she added that this appeared to be what was behind it. Senku's eyes seemed to gleam as he turned while commenting that he understood now. At last, he said, the whole mystery was coming together. The perpetrator behind the flash of light that had turned humanity to stone thousands of years ago. Their friends' faces showed shock and concern as they listened to him say that all along, this whole time, closer than they knew, the one he was talking to was Y-Man. At last, the massive stain they were seeing was clear, writhing around on the moon's surface. The concern was evident on the faces of the people in the control room on Earth, and here Chrome shouted, asking what had happened and who they saw on the moon. Following that, it was revealed that the black smudge they saw through the space telescope was made up of mountains of Medusas, scattered all around. The three showed complete shock on their faces while observing this. They remembered Kahaku's observation that this spot changed slightly over time, and it seemed this construction was the reason for that. When Kahaku examined the Medusas closely, she immediately ran toward them, but Stanley stopped her. She noticed the Medusa she had thrown earlier floating above the other Medusas in the area. Senku pondered about their enemy mimicking his voice, and while staring at the Medusa in the capsule, he stated that only they would try to sabotage their plan using that false transmission. When his addressee didn't respond, he pointed out that he knew it could speak using radio waves whether in English or Japanese. Before long, the voice that had activated the Medusa earlier suddenly responded and agreed with Senku, which startled Zeno and others in the control room. While we returned to a point in time in their journey, Senku added that all along, this whole time, closer than they knew, these small devices were the Medusas, and these devices were the machine life forms that formed Y-Man. Everyone's eyes widened at this revelation, while the Medusa inside the capsule continued floating like a god. The voice coming from it suddenly asked if they wanted to die, which sent chills through Senku and the others. Gin also became nervous because he remembered it was the same message they heard from Y-Man before, and he also questioned why this was happening now, at this very moment, just after their astronauts had avoided a blast from the Petri beam. He sweated profusely while thinking about this, while Chrome said to wait a moment and pointed out that maybe the Medusas or Y-Man weren't trying to destroy them all. Here they realized that maybe the Medusas were trying to petrify them because they didn't want them to die. Senku grinned while observing these things, while Gin, after thinking for a moment, called out to him. He explained that he really didn't know if their new friends were capable of honest communication, but in any situation, negotiating with a new political group always begins, historically and universally, with the immediate offering of a gift. Senku thought about this, while Kahaku commented that they hadn't brought anything there. She added that besides, what kind of gift would make sense for those things, and she wondered if these devices were even alive. Senku started thinking, and declared they must operate according to replicable rules. As long as there were rules, there was science at work. His eyes gleamed and he began to grin, and added here that the only thing they were sure of was that these beings took the trouble to ask if they wanted to die. After we were briefly shown Joel and Kaseki studying the diamond inside the Medusas, Senku realized that those things, like any other organism, considered living and surviving extremely important. After that, he called to the Medusas as Y-Man and said that might not be their name, but asked if it was okay to call them that. At their current level of science, he apologized that they couldn't make more like them, but they could replenish their life force by providing new diamond batteries. One step at a time, the science of humanity had surpassed milestones and reached at least this far. Y-Man seemed to be listening to him, and he pointed out that this was their gift to them. Gin was pleased when he heard this and told Senku to now proceed slowly with what he would say next and keep it polite. However, when Senku stated their desired exchange of Y-Man stopping the emission of Petri beams whenever they had the chance, he delivered it with a shouting and angry tone, with a matching call to Y-Man as jerkwads, which left Gin speechless and nearly crying as he mentioned Senku was too candid. Y-Man suddenly asked why, and emitted a clicking sound indicating the activation of the Petri beam. So Stanley quickly tried to raise their grenade net launcher. However, Y-Man spoke and kindly told him to stop that and asked them not to move for a moment. Because of this, Stanley stopped and stared at them. While observing them, he thought that Y-Man wasn't a single entity nor a monolith acting in unison. Senku told them that he had no data to use here except intuition, but believed they would like to have maintenance. The Petri beam, he explained, served that purpose. Zeno's eyes suddenly widened while Senku was talking to Y-Man, and here he realized something. The true identity of Y-Man was the Medusa devices themselves. He explained that petrification offered everlasting life, and by dangling that reward, they encouraged intelligent life to better themselves and progress toward advancement. Here he stated that in fact, the Medusas were mechanical parasites. Zeno's face was filled with enlightenment upon learning this revelation, and he remarked that these were truly elegant organisms. Y-Man responded that his statement was accurate, and now, it said it would reveal the complete information about their petrification thousands of years ago. In the next scene, it was explained to us that Y-Man was searching for intelligent organisms to parasitize. Their search method was simple. Electromagnetic waves were unavoidable for an advanced civilization. This meant that if the waves emanating from a planet showed any regularity, it indicated an advanced civilization. After that, we were shown the time of the first descent of several Medusa on Earth that caused the petrification of swallows in different parts of the world. We then returned to the present where Senku and Y-Man were still conversing. Senku commented after hearing Y-Man's information about the petrification thousands of years ago that it really brings back memories. Afterward, he also asked why they turned the swallows to stone before humanity, and if it was a test run. Y-Man responded that it was a standard parasitism process. He explained that the advanced party selected an arbitrary species, and the targeting was based on the DNA of those fortunate organisms. Chelsea questioned his use of the word fortunate, saying it was as if he was suggesting that the swallows were lucky to be petrified. Gin also commented that he believed the Medusa implied that turning to stone and enjoying a permanent, deathless existence was a cause for celebration. That was his opinion. Next, as we returned to a point in time when the world was just beginning to have sightings of petrified swallows, it was explained here that the petrification waves, which trigger an elemental phase change, appear as light on the visible spectrum only to the chosen targets. The most intelligent species on this planet was the one that recognized that petrification granted eternal life. The same species that immediately began discussing the matter via electromagnetic waves. Humanity, the optimal target for the main force to parasitize. During these times, when Y-Man realized this was when they began enveloping humanity with Petri beams from the Medusa, which caused their transformation into stones. It was added here that the stone was made to be easier to undo when more brainpower was used and maximized. And it was also noted here that an external corrosion agent could speed up the removal process. Next, it was explained that those individuals would then no longer be able to resist the allure of eternal life. Instead, they would cultivate the parasitic Y-Man in perpetuity. Afterward, we returned to the time when Y-Man sent a massive Petri beam that covered the entire world, which was witnessed by the astronauts, who decided to return to Earth and restart humanity's development. After about 3,000 years, there was a small village on Treasure Island. It was explained here that the people there produced electromagnetic waves through frequent polishing of ores. Normally, this would have been too minor to detect, but unknown to them, their hair accessories served as dipole antennae, which amplified their emitted waves. Because of this, their waves reached the moon, which Y-Man detected. They immediately wondered if these were revived individuals or survivors who weren't petrified. In response, countless Medusa descended again towards this village. The explanation continued, and here it was stated that to properly parasitize humanity, humans needed to be taught how to activate the waves that would petrify their own kind. Y-Man communicated via radio waves, so the same dipole antennae that emitted weak signals could receive messages at the same frequency. When one of the villagers picked up one of the Y-Man, she heard a voice, which made her think it might have come from the gods. This woman repeated the phrases she heard about 1 meter 1 second, which triggered the Petri beam and caused her petrification. After that, this was when other people started using Y-Man for evil purposes, and we can see here that this was during Matsukaze's time. Returning to the present, Gin nervously thought that most likely, these beings had no concept of negotiation. He saw eternal life only as an irresistible offer, which made him comment that their situation was looking dire. Afterward, it was stated here that these devices began to have doubts. Despite eternal life, the beings remained petrified, never dying, but taking no further action. Following this, we revisited Senku's first revival in the New Stone world, how he strived to gradually raise humanity again and the trials he experienced. And we were also shown here how Zeno started his own kingdom of science with his team. After that, we moved to the point where Ibarra used this device for evil, and it was explained here that humanity showed no inclination toward cultivating the devices. Far from being able to produce more Medusa, humanity could not even replace their batteries. Because of this, the Y-Man thought that humanity lacked the necessary intelligence, or perhaps they were an incorrect species to parasitize. They only emitted minor electromagnetic waves, so the devices also thought they might just be an inferior species. However, everything seemed to change when Senku decided they would create a GPS that could emit extremely powerful radio waves. When Senku and his team completed their GPS, they immediately caught the attention of the Y-Man on the moon. They commented that humanity was capable of producing strong electromagnetic waves after all. They apparently didn't lack intelligence, so why weren't they pursuing eternal life? And why didn't they desire to be petrified? After that, we went to the time when Senku and his team were riding their speedboat to test their GPS, and this was the instance when they first heard Y-Man's repetitive why. Senku responded there and grinning. He said that he's been dying to meet it, and this day marked the opening of humanity's negotiations with Y-Man. In the next scene, it was explained here that all life must inevitably face death, and the Y-Men were no exception to this. For these petrification devices, oxygen was poisonous as their mechanical guts eventually oxidize, or in simpler terms, they rust. We were shown here briefly the gradual changes in the world as time passed, and Y-Man commented here that these lives have now faded, after which we were shown again the pyramid made of non-functioning Y-Men that Senku and his team had seen before. While on the moon, Y-Man stated here that death was, above all else, repulsive and terrifying, and the ultimate goal of all life was to survive. The Petri beam continued to spread across the world here, while Y-Man added that petrification gave humanity an eternal escape from death's grip, and they expected nothing could be more wonderful than that. However, they still rejected the stone, so he wondered perplexedly why. After that, we returned to the point in time of Y-Man's first communication with Senku and his team, and here it's reiterated that the parasites offered the enticing allure of eternal life. For the Y-Men, there was no concept of negotiation, but they could employ logic. When Y-Man made contact with Senku and his team during these times, he noticed that this particular population seemed unaware of their existence. In their last battle with Ibarra, when Senku used the Medusa with his voice to petrify Ibarra, it caught the attention of the Y-Men, and they were surprised that the petrifying wave was voice-activated via radio waves. Here they realized that if that was the case, they would employ the same method, at the same frequency, with the same voice. Once the planet of humanity was enveloped, they would know the glory of petrification. When they realized this, they tried to petrify the world again, where Ukyo was shocked when it used Senku's voice, and here he also noticed it was a synthetic voice. Using the same radio waves, the Kingdom of Science used this to prevent Xeno's side from defeating them. Because of that, the Petri beam encircled the entire world again, which gave great relief to the Y-Men. They thought they had succeeded. The most intelligent life form on the planet had finally understood the glory of petrification. After that, Suika's revival occurred, which after 7 years also led to the revival of the Kingdom of Science. Here Tsukasa and Senku discussed that eternal life was a taboo. Y-Man's Dr. Stone that wasn't for humanity. Their own forbidden fruit. The story continued, and during this time, once more, humanity began exchanging radio waves while reviving the petrified population. The Y-Men wondered why they rejected everlasting life, and the logic didn't seem apparent. Because of that, they thought that perhaps humanity actually wanted to die, and it seemed this was the reason why they asked that horrifying question to Senku and his team. Afterward, we revisited the time when Senku and his team placed their Medusa in a vacuum tube. After they sealed it, Y-Man wondered where it was and also noticed that its poison, oxygen, was gone, which caused its mobility to return. The Medusa began to rattle, which made Yo and Gin nervous, and it appeared that Y-Man was thinking here that he needed to unleash the petrifying wave to inform the intelligent life forms of their existence. This was when the previous mysterious activation of the Medusa occurred without anyone giving it commands. In the present, Senku commented that, of course, what happened during those hours wasn't a misfire, but an intentional act, to which Y-Man responded that his statement was accurate. After that, Senku thought for a moment and soon commented that this is great, and there was just one point they needed to clear up, which confused Taiju as he wondered if it was really just one point since he was still very confused about what was happening. Gin volunteered to summarize it. After petrifying the smartest beings, Y-Man thought they would be grateful for eternal life and offer to serve them. That was their goal from the start. Senku shouted that he understood they just wanted to use their science to replace their batteries and make more Y-Men, but by sealing humanity in stone for thousands of years, they destroyed the scientific civilization that was key to the whole operation. He asked why they sabotaged their own plan like that. The Y-Men fell silent for a moment, but soon explained that when they arrived on the moon, they found abandoned space travel equipment, which was an implication of intelligent life. The undoing of petrification was faster through high brain activity, but humanity still needed several thousand years to awaken, which indicated they didn't meet the Y-Men's initial expectations of intelligence. Chrome became irritated at this, so Gin quickly said that anger and indignation wouldn't help them, while Xeno pointed out that they were just explaining the truth in their own way. Senku responded and said that perhaps their science was lacking a bit. He asked how the Y-Men defied gravity and how they managed to float like they were doing. He said he didn't have any clue how that was happening, but he was ready to learn. He explained that humanity's full-blown scientific civilization was only a few thousand years old. He said that their lives might be fleeting, but they've got 7 billion people to pick up where the last folks left off. That's how they make progress at dizzying speeds. While Y-Man continued to listen, Senku added that on that note, he wanted to negotiate. Just him and it, face to face. Ukyo wondered what Senku meant by that, as did the other scientists listening to him. Gin became nervous here because he thought Senku didn't want the world to hear their conversation. Xeno also wondered how they would do that because private talks meant they somehow needed to contain the radio waves without any leaks. In Senku and his team's situation, countless Y-Men began moving toward the 3 astronauts. Kahaku's eyes widened here when she and Stanley noticed that these beings were moving them away from Senku, while at the same time surrounding him. Soon, numerous Medusa gradually surrounded Senku, and they lifted him by creating a platform. A massive sphere made of Y-Men formed here, with Senku inside, while Kahaku and Stanley remained outside. Senku stood here while the Y-Man they were talking to floated right in front of him. Next, it was explained that the Y-Men transmitted information solely through electromagnetic waves. So any transmissions within a sealed sphere would be contained and unavailable to outside parties. Senku began speaking here and said that if they were willing to lend them their bodies, they would have a real shot at this. It would sound crazy, but he asked the Y-Men to hear him out. The Y-Men asked what he meant by lending their bodies to him, to which he seriously replied that the whole universe had better get excited about this. The time has come for this battle between Senku and the force behind the petrification known as Y-Man. The fate of all humanity would be decided by this showdown. The shock was visible on the faces of those in the control room and Ryusui when they saw Senku being surrounded by countless Medusa devices. The inexplicable anxiety was evident on Gen's face while he observed these events. While inside the Y-Man sphere, Senku commented that he couldn't imagine how the mechanics of Y-Man's floating ability worked. Y-Man responded that they were indeed floating, and he created an example. Y-Man sent a signal to the other Medusa devices, and they gradually formed a skeleton, explaining that they were capable of assuming human forms. Following that, Y-Man created a large skull with a frightening yet cool appearance. While observing this, Senku said he got an idea from this concept of ignoring gravity. Senku began conversing with Y-Man, who listened attentively to their serious discussion. Outside the sphere, Kahaku commented that it seemed they needed to stay in the fight without any clue about what Senku and Y-Man were discussing inside, while Stanley added that the conversation between those two was taking quite long. In his mind, he also said he should prepare for the worst because Senku might have already been petrified in there. Suddenly, several Medusa devices flew away from the sphere, and Y-Man began to explain that humanity lacked the necessary intellect to replicate their kind. Therefore, they had decided to leave planet Earth to search for another one. They also said they would give them the gift of petrification so they shouldn't run, which made Kahaku and Stanley anxious. Several Medusa devices flew around and began to glow while approaching them, prompting Stanley to quickly aim their grenade net launcher at them. The main Y-Man sent signals again to the other Medusa devices, and they suddenly stopped. They just glowed while floating, while Stanley continued aiming their grenade net launcher at them. The Y-Man sphere disappeared there, and Senku saw them, which worried him and took his attention. Y-Man observed their weapon and contemplated the outcome if Stanley were to shoot. He pointed out that it was in the perfect line of fire and many of them would die. Stanley responded that he wouldn't shoot as long as they didn't charge. Kahaku interjected and said that while she wasn't sure what Senku said during their conversation, they needed to keep Y-Man at the bargaining table. Keeping him there was all they could do. Senku grinned at that and told Y-Man that he knew they as parasites weren't brainless enough to fight against their own hosts. But going back to what he was explaining earlier, they should forget about searching for another planet and work with them instead. If that happened, humanity and Y-Man might be able to create something truly out of this world. Y-Man responded that the probability of that plan succeeding was near zero, which Senku questioned and said sounds about right. Senku pulled out a primitive hammer from his pocket and added that nevertheless, near zero isn't zero, not when it comes to them. They should look at him as an example. This smooth and shiny monkey had arrived in the stone world with nothing, and in just 10 years, they were now on the moon. He raised his primitive hammer and pointed it at Y-Man to prove his point. Afterwards, Y-Man began to rise into the air and said they couldn't honor his request. Abandonment was the fate of their kind, and they would search for other planets and more intelligent organisms. This made Senku and Zeno furrow their brows. Y-Man suddenly added that, however, he may be taken by them and only him. He explained that this body was theirs to destroy and kill. He pointed out that Senku was talking about a creation that was out of this world, and it was giving him excitement. The probability was near 0%, but it was enough for one to bet everything on humanity. Y-Man asked if that was acceptable while approaching Senku's palms, to which Senku happily agreed. After that, the other Medusa devices finally flew away from the moon, and then Senku and his group boarded their space shelter to return to the spaceship. While they were heading back, Senku explained here that Y-Man had abandoned their plans to parasitize Earth and vanished into the depths of space, and would never unleash the Petri beam again. As a reward, their trophy was a single piece of futuristic science. Ryusui immediately high-fived Senku when they returned to the spaceship, while their friends in the control room also cheered. After that, a space pod detached, and they bid farewell to the spaceship. Kahaku commented that it seemed they had it backwards because if the capsule was turned into a vacuum, Y-Man could remain conscious and float around, to which Y-Man agreed. Afterwards, Kahaku shouted to wait and asked that wasn't he a mechanical parasite, and if so, who created him and where did he come from? Y-Man answered that it was unknown, which silenced Kahaku. Y-Man then asked if humanity could comprehend who or what created them, and if they possessed complete knowledge of their origin. Ryusui commented that it was a clever comeback. Kahaku, meanwhile, thought that it really was a total mystery. What indeed was life as they knew it? Y-Man explained that survival was the primary objective of all life forms. Because he thought of that, he also asked why humans didn't want to be petrified and why they rejected the promise of eternal life. Senku answered that it was because it didn't excite him. Ryusui also responded that there was nothing fun about being frozen in stone, while Kahaku said her mind almost immediately faded when it happened. Y-Man commented that what they were saying was incomprehensible, and it was a disadvantageous decision for any organism. So why? Senku shouted that he's one to talk because of all the Y-Men. Only he remained because he got hyped up by his idea. What Y-Man said earlier had nothing to do with survival, and he added that asking why about all these unknowns was what got them excited. Abnormal or not, they were 10 billion% guaranteed to have this weird urge. He also explained that their science advanced one painstaking, steady step at a time, over the eras before their time and throughout the ages to come. After that, their vessel gradually entered Earth's atmosphere. Their pod began to ignite due to frictional heating, and upon reaching sufficient height, they activated the parachute that would slow their descent. Upon reaching the ocean, their floating device also activated. After several days, the new Perseus and aircraft picked them up. Upon their return to the Kingdom of Science, they held an awarding ceremony for the astronauts, and each one of them was awarded a special medal for their bravery and strength, which they happily accepted with their heads held high. Following that, he gave each of his close friends his signature high five as gratitude for their trust, courage, and help in reaching what they had achieved today. And now, Y-Man had returned with them to Earth. In the next scene, after several years, we were shown that they had built a large city in America. In a room, Gin was speaking with several scientists about something while wearing a suit and tie. Afterward, he boarded a flying boat back to Japan, where Francois, Max, and Suika greeted him. He commented that after switching back, there was something about his old outfit that just felt right. Following that, they boarded a car driven by Francois. He mentioned how brutal it was, wondering how long it had been since he'd been home to Japan. He was a mentalist by trade, not a diplomat. Francois answered that bringing together the nations of their new world required explanation and negotiation, so his skills were indispensable. Gin just accepted that reason and added that nevertheless, he needed to return home for this specific occasion, for the wedding of his beloved friends Taiju and Yuzuriha. The scene shifted to the said wedding, where the newly united couple was overjoyed, along with their parents and friends who attended. Gin was shocked when he learned from the two that this was day 2 of their wedding. Yuzuriha explained that this way, more of their friends could attend, while Taiju just shouted bring it on, and the more celebration, the merrier. Kahaku interjected and explained that the science team was busy, so Senku and his team had to leave right after day 1, to which Gin said that was reasonable since it usually only lasted one day anyway. On the other side, Stanley and Yo showed off as they shot the flying balloons. Maz was flirting with women, which silenced Kirisame and Amaryllis. Chelsea also arrived there carrying minerals, and when Soyuz polished it, a shiny thing was revealed. Suddenly, Kahaku thought this was a good time to ask something, where she approached Ruri and asked about her and Chrome, which surprised and made her blush. This immediately caught Luna's attention, and she thought it seemed it was time for this smooth operator to listen. She added that it's not like she was dying to hear tips on how to get a scientist, like it was not obvious, which made Carlos and Max stare with a poker face at her. Ruri began explaining how their conversation happened earlier, and we see here that while she and Chrome were at the table, he called her and straight to the point said that when this bad science project of his and his companions was finished, they should get married, which greatly surprised her, and she just agreed while blushing. She cried while explaining this to Kahaku, which silenced her and the gossipy Luna, who thought she hadn't gotten any helpful role models here. Gin questioned what Chrome said about the bad science project to Tsukasa, and he agreed that what he heard was correct. He also explained that with each step science takes, the rules governing their world would inevitably change. He added that he yoga, Zeno, and he once killed to prevent the rebirth of old world's hierarchies. But at this point, the idea of such a grim future was a distant memory. Hyoga, who was beside him, spoke that regardless, once law and order were established in the new world, there was a high chance they would be judged and condemned, where Ukio grinned at them and said everything depended on the success of the science team. In fact, there were other possibilities that I don't know because he didn't continue. Next, we went to the situation of the newlyweds with their friends, and here Taiju was running quickly to Senku to give him cake because he had been busy all night, where Gin made a side comment about how novel the newlyweds' courtesy was. Soon, they approached where Senku was, but when Gin got close, to his great surprise, a woman who just had similar hair to him greeted him, which made him shout asking who this was. This woman explained that each nation had sent scientists to join the team and study the petrification devices, while Gin commented in his mind that they had mistaken their identity there. While the scientists observed the broken-apart Y-Man, a scientist here said to remember that a type of pool called the Higgs field gives mass to fundamental matter particles, while the woman who looked like Senku added that the petrification device was capable of altering the water pressure in said pool. Another woman with black hair said that by reducing its mass or weight to zero, it could fly, and another elderly person added that petrification was the phenomenon where organic molecules gained increased resistance via the Higgs field. While these people were talking, Gin was speechless and commented that now he understood that Senku's Spartan lectures were actually on the easy side. When he looked at the Medusa, he also commented that this must be the Y-Man that Senku and his team brought from the moon and that it had been broken down for study. However, a female scientist told him no, that was just one of many broken ones, and a male scientist said that the all-important living specimen was in the inner chamber where Dr. Senku and his team were handling their special project. After that, they reached a hallway blocked by a high warning door, which made Yuzuriha wonder if this was what Chrome called the bad science project. Taiju shouted at Senku with complete joy that today was the big day because he was finally married to Yuzuriha, where Yuzuriha pointed out that he had said that yesterday. When they opened the door, they saw Senku tinkering with what appeared to be an intricate device, and Taiju's eyes gleamed while looking at it. Senku commented there that this was very interesting and that from all his cheering from the science lab, his vocal cords were about to snap. When he said this, he wondered because this little back and forth sounded familiar, where Taiju laughed while Yuzuriha said they brought cake for him and the science team. The giant thing in front of them immediately caught Gin's attention, and he stutteringly asked if this whatever it is fantastic machine was the bad science project. Chrome and Suika answered yes and said they were doing something amazing there, while Kaseki told him doesn't it look slick and they had started it from the very structure. Y-Man suddenly commented that returning to the past to stop the incursion upon their Earth would avert many deaths of his kind. Gin was shocked when he heard the word past, and he couldn't believe what he was thinking and what that meant. Senka grinned at that and soon pointed out that they were building a time machine there, while showing us its amazing appearance. The disbelief was clearly visible on Gin's face at what he was seeing, and even Ukio was in awe of it. With tears in his eyes, he commented that 21st century logic said it couldn't be done, but perhaps now their grand goal could be realized. Just like shooting the Petri beam into the past to petrify victims before they even met their fates. Maybe they could save all 7 billion members of humanity through this. While Senku remembered Byakuya and the other astronauts, his face seemed to fill with eagerness to accomplish this science project. Gin was still in awe while listening, while Zeno explained that, or perhaps, instead they had thought about transmitting data into the past to give humanity an artificial intelligence savior. Ryusui interjected and said he desired whatever science they could think of. He added that people mocked every impossible dream and asked if he was right that they've overcome every challenge. After that, they showed us the roadmap of their time machine project. I'll just show it to you bit by bit because there's so much of it. You can just look at it yourselves. Gin began to cry and said he believed Senku could do it. Or rather, humanity really could do this. One painstaking step at a time, they would build a time machine. Over decades, centuries, and even if it took millennia. Senku agreed and said that was because science pierces across time itself to discover and unearth new rules about their universe. After that, he added that so all he could say to that was for them to get excited. In the next scene, Senku is seen completely out of breath. He couldn't understand what was happening or where he had ended up. When he looked at his hands and his surroundings, He was shocked to realize he was floating in the ocean. But instead of panicking, he just laughed. He couldn't remember why he was alone there in the open sea. So he tried hard to recall what happened because it seemed no rescue would come for him. Since the big reset of human civilization, he knew it would be impossible to search for someone in the ocean. When he looked around, he couldn't see any land. So he thought there was no point in swimming. He was 10 billion% sure he wouldn't survive that and death would be unavoidable. But he smiled and just commented, "Yeah, right," as if he would accept that so easily. They had started on a primitive planet and slowly but surely rebuilt civilization from scratch to reach that point. So, he declared it was time for terraforming. What did it matter if he was lost at sea? He just needed to start from scratch again. And because of that, he felt excited. He thought about how long he could survive and realized how long it would take for the salt water to drain his body heat. When Senku touched his skin, he noticed it was coated with oil. That's when he realized that applying oil to his body provided a primitive dry suit that would help him withstand the cold water. Mecha Senku explained that compared to water, oil has lower thermal conductivity. If you try to chill oil and water at the same temperature in the refrigerator and put your finger in them, the water feels colder. Senku thought that he must have done this to himself. He looked at the bags he was carrying to find other clues. He had revival fluid, but less than what he usually carried. He only had enough for 3 people. He was also carrying one of their DIY earpieces. When he put it in his ear, he heard a buzzing sound. He then noticed something and started swimming. However, Senku said swimming with clothes on was difficult. Fortunately, he had gone through hellish astronaut training and had practiced this. The earpiece kept buzzing in his ear, and he was surprised when he saw a statue in the water. It was Kahaku's statue. Upon seeing it, he thought that the signal he was hearing in the earpiece might have come from her life jacket's beacon. Senku smiled again because now he remembered. Everything was coming back to him, hard and fast, down to the last detail. They were on an airplane during a storm. Taiju had announced how happy he was that everyone came along for their honeymoon. He said it was more fun that way, but Senku wasn't pleased about this. Kahaku and the others knew that Mr. Efficiency Senku wouldn't leave just for fun. They were right to think that because Senku said Norway was the only place that had the rare ingredient he was looking for. That was a real treasure. If he could bring that ingredient back, it meant they would make progress along with their futuristic new world crafting world map. According to Ginro, they were there to guard that treasure. But Senku replied that he didn't need all of them there. Gin then said that after all the hellish labor he had put them through, they should at least be allowed to go on vacation. Because of that, Chelsea said their bestie Gin had the right idea. The Medusa was also part of that trip. It wanted to witness the future crafting while humanity progressed. Chrome agreed and said he couldn't wait to see all the science they would do. However, while they were traveling, something strange happened to their aircraft. Chrome wondered if it was icy blue fire. Their engine exploded, causing Ryu Sui to struggle with controlling it. As a result, their airplane went into a nosedive. Because of this, chaos erupted inside, and the Medusa was knocked out of its container. When Senku asked what happened, Ryu Sui said he wasn't sure. Something had caused their main engine to explode, making it stop. The airplane was spinning downward, so Senku was curious if they could still fix it. Ryu Sui replied that they couldn't anymore. Everyone became worried when they heard they were going to die. As usual, Senku wasn't rattled by this and didn't accept it. Even Ryu Sui just smiled as they were descending toward the water. They exited the aircraft and dove into the water together. Taiju caught the Medusa. Ryu Sui was overjoyed because he had never skydived without a parachute before. So I couldn't believe he was still enjoying himself in that situation. Kahaku shouted and ordered everyone to take their protective positions. Then, Taiju commanded the Medusa 500 meters, 1 second. Because of this, they were all petrified before hitting the water. The storm was so strong that their stone statues were carried away by the water. Coincidentally, a jar of revival fluid broke right on Senku's head, which revived him. However, his head hit a tree trunk, causing him to feel dizzy. Meanwhile, some noticed that their aircraft had disappeared from the radar. It was the scientists, and according to them, rescue would be impossible in this situation. Even if they managed a water landing against all odds, they couldn't expect to survive in the open ocean. Zeno remarked that thinking this way was normal, but only if you didn't know Senku. Back to the present, Senku used another jar of revival fluid on Kahaku. At last, she was revived. When she saw Senku in front of her, she couldn't help but hug him, which surprised Senku. He gave her 10 billion points because she had curled up like a ball to minimize heat loss. But Kahaku was surprised that he didn't even blush a little. Senku replied that there was no time for nonsense since it was an emergency. Nevertheless, Kahaku knew that he could have just hauled her as a statue. That would have been the easiest way to keep her alive. But he chose to revive her as someone who could share the risks and help push forward as his partner. Senku agreed with this. Kahaku was about to say something but suddenly got distracted when, with her incredibly clear eyesight, she noticed something in the distance. She quickly swam toward a floating tree trunk. She said that as a woman who lived by water, she was ready to build whatever they needed. There in the open seas, they would restore scientific civilization. That night, Senku was amazed when she caught a huge fish. At last, the aqua warrior Kahaku had joined the party. They stayed there on the tree trunk that night. The next day, Senku collected seaweed and used it to make rope, which Kahaku then used to tie together the floating tree trunks there. She said that she and Senku were extremely lucky. The storm might have helped. She couldn't believe they had found so much driftwood, seaweed, and other floating debris there. Senku replied that it was too convenient, and there was always a logical answer behind coincidences. The fact is, they were in the Sargasso Sea, or which she may know better as the Bermuda Triangle. However, Kahaku said she hadn't heard about it before. Senku explained that it was a patch of still water surrounded by swirling currents. This meant that debris and flotsam gathered there. From what Kahaku knew about Ryusui and his impressive piloting skills, he probably read the wind and water to ensure they would splash down in that area. However, she wondered where that leaves them. Senku just answered that adrift and floating. He added that escaping the Bermuda Triangle was 10 billion% impossible. The next day, Senku picked up another signal on his earpiece. When they observed their surroundings, they saw their other companions not far away. It turned out to be the off-inspired science user Chrome and the hardworking science user Suika, who then joined their party. Chrome couldn't believe that Senku had used the remaining revival fluid on them. He questioned whether he should have saved some for Taiju. That stamina monster could have been handy. In the background, Kahaku and Suika were overjoyed to see each other again. According to Senku, he might die waiting to get lucky. Anyway, they needed a labor force. They expanded their makeshift raft using the floating tree trunks in the water. Meanwhile, Kahaku caught another large fish. Senku was amazed at how they handled the fish. After all, they were from the water tribe. They cooked the sliced fish, and as a result, they obtained fish oil. Senku was pleased because that was what they used for lamps during the Edo period. He said they could ignite the fish oil to boil water and collect its drippings. That simple still would provide them with drinking water. Besides that, he explained that palm trees yield coconut sugar, and if they ferment it, they would have booze. And if they distill it, they would get high-proof alcohol. Kahaku asked what the alcohol was for. She said they're bigger things they should be worried about. Chrome explained that if they take the alcohol and add to it the miracle fluid known as nitric acid, then they would have more revival fluid. They continued drifting in the ocean, and before long, they found Ukiyo's stone statue. Suika sprinkled their remaining revival fluid on him, but nothing happened. Chrome asked if they would start from scratch in the open sea until they could make a mini revival fluid factory. Senku agreed, but the problem was there was no nitric acid around, and it was a key ingredient for that. So, all they could do for now was restore civilization one painstaking step at a time. It rained again, and Kahaku asked why they couldn't just make that life-giving acid. Suika said that was impossible. They couldn't make it without platinum and other science supplies. That's why when she made it before, she had collected a huge amount of poop over several years. Kahaku couldn't believe this. Suika recounted that Senku had left instructions on how to make nitric acid, and she had read all of it. She suddenly remembered that one of the options was electrical arcs. She mentioned this to Senku and reminded him of the method that uses a big, powerful zap of electricity. Senku knew about that, but too bad they didn't have a massive power plant there. Suika felt disappointed. saying if only they could use the continual current from the lightning there. Chrome thought about it and said that when their airplane crashed, there was also a storm like this, and the lightning seemed to flow at that time. At that moment, it looked like icy blue fire. Because of what Chrome said, Senku seemed to get an idea. He praised Chrome and Suika, saying they never let him down. It goes to show what a trio of science users can do. At last, he understood why their airplane fell from the sky. But this time, they would harness that nasty force of nature using science. He stood up and pointed his finger upward and it glowed. Senku had his game face on for this challenge. They asked if they were going to use the icy blue fire. Chrome couldn't believe that what he saw on the plane would help them. Senku called it St. Elmo's fire. He explained it was an eerie phenomenon that causes ship tips to glow. Some people think it's a miracle given by St. Elmo, the saint of sailors. But in truth, it's like reverse lightning that happens directly under thunderclouds. In flat and empty open waters, it easily triggers on tall and pointed objects. When enough static electricity builds up, it looks like fire leaping from the tallest point into the air. The tips of Senku's hair suddenly glowed, and they said Senku was part of it now because of his spiky hair. After that realization, they gathered another floating tree trunk from the water and mounted it on their raft. They were amazed when its tips started glowing. The next day, Senku and Kahaku dove underwater. While Kahaku was catching crabs, the two noticed something. It was the corned beef can they had made. Kahaku punctured it with a knife, and Suika was delighted to see the cotton candy machine, remembering the good times from before. Using the materials they had, the four collaborated on their next project. Kahaku blew air into a pipe connected to the tree's tip. Senku explained that the super high-voltage discharge produces nitrogen dioxide in that pocket of air. We then see how they used St. Elmo's fire, glass wool they made using the cotton candy machine, and water. Senku said that when they dissolve it in water, they would get nitric acid, their miracle fluid. As a result, they made revival fluid which they used on Ukyo. At last, their sonar man joined their party. Using the earpiece and his impressive hearing, he pointed out where their other companions were. Next, they revived and found history's strongest primate high schooler, Tsukasa. He was so strong that he managed to catch a whale in the water. The next to join them were the gregarious geographer Chelsea and the meek mathematician Sai. The two created a map, while Sai did the math for it. At last, they found another companion in the ocean. It was Ryusui. He was overjoyed and said the ocean was his to command. Senku asked him if once they found a sail, could he take them home. Ryusui asked who did Senku think he was talking to. Next, they revived Gin. Upon returning, he asked how they would make one. He was nervous because there was nothing there they could use to craft a giant sail with. However, Senku showed him a fish skin. While they were working, Senku explained that in the past, the Ainu people made fish skin clothing called sepuar. Gin couldn't believe it was going to be hellish labor again. Now, Kahaku understood why they needed a big labor force. The group was also joined by the married couple Taiju and Yuzuriha, as well as the siblings Ginro and Kinro. Yuzuriha showed a different level of dedication in sewing the fish skin to make their cloth. Everyone was amazed by her extraordinary sewing capability. Because of this, their improvised boat kept improving. It even got an extension on the other side. Meanwhile, ships could be seen in the water. Several helicopters were also flying around searching for Senku and the others. One of the pilots was Zeno. However, he still hadn't found them. When the scientists met, they tried to stop Zeno's hopeless search. They said they understood how he felt, but enough was enough. They said it was absurd that he still believed they were alive. Nevertheless, Zeno didn't give up. Just then, someone came to call him. They quickly ran to see what was in the ocean. Everyone was shocked when they saw their makeshift ship. As they approached the harbor, Senku was just smiling while Chrome was busy eating. Zeno was impressed that even in the ocean, Senku managed to terraform scientific civilization to push forward. He couldn't help but comment on how truly elegant it was. At last, Senku and his party set foot on land again. He apologized to Zeno that it took them quite a while, but he said they had a special delivery. He said their scientist would surely drool over this treasure. When they opened the chest, it contained gravel. Ginro couldn't believe that the product of all their misery and hardship was just to bring home gravel. Kahaku said that even she now knew that simple stones could become scientific treasures. Zeno agreed with this. He explained that it could only be obtained from Norway and couldn't be manufactured. It was ultra-high purity silicon metal. Now, Senka said, they could move along their time machine's futuristic roadmap and create semiconductors. Kahaku was impressed, first with St. Elmo's fire, and now this. She said science users utilize everything Earth offers and turn them into weapons of progress. Zeno asked if it was just Earth, because in his opinion, they weren't acknowledging that limitation. Senku added that they were there to save every person remaining. And to make a time machine that could do that, Earth's resources alone weren't enough. They didn't have helium-3 there, for one. Gin couldn't believe when he heard this and asked what it meant. Senku said that with their semiconductors, it would be a scientific crafting bonanza, because their next mission involves terraforming other planets to construct cities in space. Everyone's eyes widened when they learned of this plan. Zeno added that they would surpass what the 21st century achieved and called it an elegant future. He said it was the dawn of cosmic pioneering. Of course, Ryusui said he desired all of that. After humanity's 200 million years of science, everything was crafting material. The very planets of the universe and giant rocks would help save humanity. In short, they were all a bunch of Dr. Stones. The science users were fired up to make it happen. They went straight to creating a roadmap for the space cities they would build. So, Senka said, it was time to get excited.